Welcome. Tonight we are going to the surface of the ocean, not the surface you see from shore, the nervous fringe of water that breaks against rocks and sand and retreats again, the surface that belongs to the edge. We are going to the open surface, the deep water surface, the place where the ocean meets the sky hundreds of kilometers from any land, where the water beneath you goes down for miles, and the horizon is a perfect circle, and there is nothing above you but atmosphere, and nothing below you but depth. We are going to the surface because the animals we are here to meet tonight live at the surface. They are not deep-sea creatures. They are not reef dwellers or sand-bottom hunters or creatures of the twilight zone. They are air-breathing animals that return to the surface every few minutes or every few hours, depending on the species. Because they are mammals, and mammals breathe air, and the surface is the place where air and ocean meet. We are going to spend tonight with whales. Find your position now. Let the surface you are lying on hold you the way the ocean holds everything that floats on it, without effort, without condition, simply by being what it is. The weight of the day is settling out of your body. Your breathing is slowing. The light is low, and somewhere out there, in the dark water that covers most of this planet, a whale is breathing at the surface, sending a column of warm vapor into the cold air. And the sound of that breath is one of the most ancient sounds that the atmosphere of Earth has ever contained, because whales have been breathing at the surface of the ocean for 50 million years, and the sound of the blow is 50 million years old. And tonight, if you are very still, you can almost hear it. Let that number settle into your body the way sleep settles in. 50 million years. The whales were swimming in the ocean before the Himalayas had fully formed, before the Amazon existed, before the grasslands of Africa existed, before most of the mountain ranges of the modern world had been pushed up by the geological processes that are still pushing them now. The ocean in which the first whales swam was the Tethys Sea, a warm tropical ocean that has since been closed by the movement of the continents, an ocean that no longer exists in any form we would recognize. The whales survived the closing of that ocean. They survived the opening of the Atlantic. They survived the Antarctic becoming cold, and the formation of the polar ice and the ice ages and the warm periods, and the shifting of the ocean currents and every other rearrangement of the planetary climate that the last 50 million years has produced. They are still here, still breathing at the surface, still sending up their columns of vapor into whatever atmosphere the current moment has to offer. 50 million years of surface breathing, 50 million years of the blow. Before the whales were whales, they were land animals. This is one of the facts about whales that most people know, but that never quite loses its capacity to astonish, no matter how many times you encounter it. The ancestors of modern whales were four-legged mammals that lived on land, that walked on the shore and waded into shallow water to hunt fish, that gradually, over millions of years of evolutionary change, became more aquatic, lost their hind limbs, modified their front limbs into flippers, flattened their tails into the horizontal flukes that are the whale's primary propulsive organ, and moved from the land into the ocean permanently, becoming what they are now, which is the largest animals that have ever lived on this planet and some of the most extraordinary organisms that biology has ever produced. The fossil record of this transition is remarkably complete, more complete than the fossil record of almost any other major evolutionary transformation. We have Pachycetus, a wolf-sized four-legged land mammal from 53 million years ago that had the inner ear anatomy of a whale and was probably an excellent swimmer. We have Ambulocetus, a few million years later, a semi-aquatic animal that could walk on land and swim in water, that propelled itself in water by undulating its spine in the same way that a modern whale undulates its spine, though Ambulocetus did this with legs rather than flukes. We have Rhodhocetus, more aquatic still, with reduced hind limbs and a longer tail that may already have been developing the musculature for fluke propulsion. We have Dorudon and Basilosaurus, fully aquatic whales from 37 million years ago. Animals that could not have survived on land, that were already the size of large modern cetaceans, that had tiny vestigial hind limbs no longer functional for locomotion, that were already hunting fish in the ancient ocean with the echolocation abilities that their descendants still use today. The transition from land to sea took about 15 million years. It is one of the most complete stories in evolutionary biology, a transformation so total and so well documented that it has become a textbook example of how evolution works, of how a lineage can move from one environment to another and become, in the process, something completely different from what it was. The modern whales are divided into two groups: the baleen whales, the mysticetes, which feed by filtering enormous volumes of water through plates of keratin called baleen, straining out the small crustaceans and small fish and plankton that constitute their diet; and the toothed whales, the odontocetes, which hunt by echolocation, producing sound and listening to the echoes to build a picture of their environment that is detailed enough to identify individual fish at range and pursue them through dark water. The two groups diverged approximately 35 million years ago, and since then they have both diversified and specialized and adapted to different niches in the ocean in ways that have made them, collectively, the dominant large animal group in the marine environment. There are approximately 90 species of cetaceans alive today. They range from the blue whale, the largest animal that has ever existed on this planet, at 30 meters and 180 tons, to the harbor porpoise, a small-toothed whale of cold coastal waters that reaches perhaps 1.5 meters in length and weighs about 50 kilograms. Between those extremes, there is a world of form and behavior and ecological role that most people never see and that we are going to visit tonight. Close your eyes now or let them go soft and unfocused. The water is dark and wide, and the surface is somewhere above you. The demarcation between the ocean and the sky, the line that the whales cross twice with every breath. We are going to spend this hour on both sides of that line, in the water and at the surface, in the dark of the deep and in the spray of the blow, with the largest animals on Earth and with some of the strangest and most complex creatures that biology has ever made. The blue whale, Balaenoptera musculus. We should begin here because the blue whale is, in some sense, the center of everything we are going to discuss tonight. Not because it is the most interesting whale, though it may be, but because it is the most extreme, the one that establishes the scale, the one that forces the revision of all your intuitions about what an animal can be. The blue whale is 30 meters long. That is the length of 2 school buses parked end to end, or a 10-story building laid on its side, or approximately the length of the aircraft that brought you to wherever you went on your last long-haul flight. It weighs 180 tons. Its heart is the size of a small car, perhaps a Volkswagen Beetle, and it weighs 500 kilograms, and it beats 8 times per minute at rest. Its tongue weighs as much as an adult elephant. A human child could crawl through its aorta. It breathes through 2 blowholes, and when it exhales, the blow rises 9 meters into the air and can be heard from several kilometers away on a quiet day. A sound like the exhalation of something geological, something that belongs to the category of large natural events rather than the category of animals. The blue whale is the largest animal that has ever lived, larger than any dinosaur, larger than any other mammal, larger than any fish, larger than any reptile. The largest organism in the history of complex animal life on this planet, and it is alive right now, in the ocean, swimming and feeding and breathing at the surface of the water that covers most of the Earth. There are perhaps 10 to 25,000 blue whales alive today. That sounds like a reasonable number until you learn that before the industrial whaling of the 19th and 20th centuries, there were probably 300,000. Before we had the technology to kill them efficiently, before we had steam-powered ships and explosive harpoons, the oceans held 300,000 blue whales. We reduced that to fewer than 3,000 in the worst estimates of the mid-20th century, a reduction of more than 99% in less than 100 years. The blue whale came closer to extinction than almost any large animal in the history of human-caused extinctions, and it survived, barely, and it has been recovering slowly since the International Whaling Commission moratorium on commercial blue whale hunting in 1966, and today the population is somewhere between 10 and 25,000, which is better than 3,000 but still less than 10% of what it once was. The blue whale feeds on krill, almost exclusively, a 180-ton animal sustaining itself on crustaceans that are about the size of your thumbnail. The blue whale eats approximately 4 tons of krill per day when feeding, which requires it to find concentrations of krill dense enough to make the energetic investment of opening its enormous mouth and lunging through them worthwhile. The lunge feeding of the blue whale is one of the most spectacular biomechanical events in the animal kingdom. The whale accelerates to several kilometers per hour, then opens its jaws to an angle of nearly 90 degrees, and the pleated throat, which can expand to 3 times its resting volume, inflates with water and krill like a balloon. The throat pouch of a blue whale in full expansion holds a volume of water roughly equal to its own body weight. The whale then closes its mouth and pushes the water through the baleen plates with its tongue, straining out the krill and swallowing them while the water exits through the sides of the mouth. The entire sequence, acceleration, lunge, expansion, filtration, takes a matter of seconds. The blue whale, after each lunge, has consumed perhaps 10 kilograms of krill. It will need to do this perhaps 400 times per day to meet its energy requirements. The blue whale spends most of the time it is not resting engaged in this cycle of descent, acceleration, lunge, filtration, return to surface, breath, descent, acceleration, lunge, a rhythm that has the quality of industrial processing, but that is in fact the most elegant feeding machinery that evolution has built in any animal. The sound of the blue whale. The blue whale produces sound at frequencies so low that humans cannot hear them without electronic assistance, infrasound below 20 Hz, below the threshold of human hearing. These calls travel through the ocean for thousands of kilometers, attenuated so gradually by the water's acoustic properties that a blue whale calling off the coast of California can, under the right conditions, be heard by a blue whale near Hawaii. The blue whale communicates across ocean basins. The calls carry information whose full meaning we do not understand, but that we know includes contact calls, competitive signals between males, and what appears to be a form of navigational information, the calls perhaps bouncing off the seamounts and underwater ridges of the ocean floor, and returning as echoes that allow the whale to build a passive sonar map of its environment without producing any of the high-frequency clicks of the toothed whales. The blue whale's voice is the loudest sound produced by any animal. A blue whale call measured at close range exceeds 180 decibels. This is louder than a jet engine at close range. The blue whale is calling into the ocean with a voice so powerful and so low that the ocean carries it for thousands of kilometers, and somewhere in the deep water, another blue whale hears it and understands, or does something that functions like understanding, because the response the call produces is not random. The humpback whale, Megaptera novaeangliae. The whale with the long pectoral fins, the longest fins relative to body size of any whale. Fins that can reach a third of the body length, pale on the underside in many individuals, used for maneuvering and for the spectacular behaviors that have made the humpback the most filmed and most watched of all the large whales. The breaches and the spy hops and the lobtailing and the pectoral slapping that punctuate the humpback's life at the surface with a drama that no other large whale matches. The humpback is the acrobat. It breaches, launching its full 40-ton body almost completely out of the water in an explosion of spray and muscle, falling back with a crash that can be heard from kilometers away and that can be felt in the hull of a boat at close range, a sound that is simultaneously violent and beautiful, a percussion of biology. No one is entirely certain why humpbacks breach. The candidates are communication, parasite removal, play, displays of fitness to potential mates, and the simple pleasure of the movement itself. If pleasure is a category that applies to humpback experience, which we genuinely do not know, but that we cannot confidently exclude. The humpback whale sings. This is one of the most famous facts about any animal, and it is famous for good reason. The male humpback whale in the breeding season produces song sequences that can last for hours, that have the structured complexity of human music, that change over time as new elements are added and old elements are modified, and that spread through populations from individual to individual in a way that implies cultural transmission. The passing of learned behavior from one animal to another through observation and imitation. The songs have phrases, and the phrases are organized into themes, and the themes recur in predictable orders, and the entire song is a composed piece of communication that the whale repeats and varies over hours of continuous singing, hanging motionless in the water at depths of a few tens of meters, oriented head down, producing its sound in a medium that carries it for tens of kilometers in every direction to every other humpback in the area. The songs change. Every breeding season, the songs of the males in a given ocean basin are slightly different from the previous year's songs, and the changes propagate through the population in a pattern that researchers have documented with extraordinary precision. A new phrase will appear in the songs of a few individuals in one part of the breeding range. Within a few months, the phrase has spread to most of the males in the area. Within a few years, it has spread to males across the entire breeding range. The process is not random mutation. It is cultural diffusion, the spread of an innovation through a population, the same process by which a musical trend spreads through a human population, through hearing, through imitation, through the adoption of new elements by individuals who find them, for whatever reason, attractive or worth incorporating. The humpback whale has musical culture. It has a tradition that changes over time. It has something that, if you found it in a human population, you would call a musical scene, a shared artistic practice that is constantly evolving in response to the contributions of individual innovators. Let your body sink a little deeper into the surface beneath you. The humpback song is in the water right now, somewhere in the warm oceans where humpbacks breed, in the waters of Hawaii and the Caribbean and the Pacific and the Indian Ocean. The males are hanging in the water and producing their songs into the blue, and the sound is traveling outward in all directions at 1,500 meters per second, the speed of sound in water, 4 times the speed of sound in air, and it is reaching other humpbacks kilometers away, and some of those humpbacks are responding, changing direction, approaching, and some are adding their own songs to the acoustic landscape, and the entire winter breeding ground is filled with this music that we can hear if we put a hydrophone in the water, and that the whales are navigating by and communicating through, and that no one who has ever heard it in full, through good speakers or underwater in person, has described as anything less than extraordinary. The sperm whale, Physeter macrocephalus, the largest toothed predator that has ever existed on this planet, larger than the largest predatory dinosaur, capable of reaching 20 meters in length in the largest males, with a head that is enormous even by whale standards, constituting more than a third of the body length, and housing the largest brain of any animal that has ever lived, a brain that weighs 7 kilograms, larger than a human brain by a factor of 5. The sperm whale has been called the most extreme animal on Earth by researchers who have spent careers in the company of large predators, and the case they make for that designation is compelling. The sperm whale dives deeper than any other air-breathing animal, regularly to 1,000 meters, occasionally to more than 2,000. The deepest confirmed dive is approximately 2,900 meters. At that depth, the pressure is nearly 300 times the pressure at the surface. The sperm whale's body, instead of being crushed by this pressure, is built to accommodate it. The rib cage is flexible and compressible. The lungs deflate. The oxygen is stored in the muscles, which are packed with myoglobin to a degree that makes them nearly black, and in the blood, which has a higher oxygen-carrying capacity than the blood of any land mammal. The heart rate slows to a few beats per minute. The circulation restricts to the core organs, and the whale descends into the dark at a speed of about 150 meters per minute for 40 minutes or more, hunting in complete darkness at pressures that would kill a human being in seconds. What does the sperm whale hunt at those depths? Squid, primarily. Giant squid. Colossal squid. The enormous cephalopods of the deep ocean that are among the largest invertebrates on Earth, animals with bodies the size of a human, and tentacles that bring their total length to several meters, armed with suckers ringed with sharp-toothed ratchet rings that leave circular scars on the skin of the sperm whales that hunt them. The sperm whale arrives at the depth of the giant squid in total darkness and hunts by echolocation, producing the loudest sounds of any animal. Clicks at 180 decibels, sounds that are not just for navigation, but that are, at close range, powerful enough to stun or disorient prey. The sperm whale may be using its click beam as a weapon. It may be stunning the squid before it arrives, disorienting them in the dark with a blast of sound so powerful that it temporarily overwhelms their nervous system. This is not certain, but the position of the squid in the stomachs of sperm whales, frequently undamaged by bite marks, suggests that they were not caught and bitten in the ordinary way of predation, and the extraordinary loudness of the sperm whale's clicks suggests a function beyond navigation. The spermaceti organ. The massive structure in the sperm whale's head that gives the species its name, filled with a waxy oil called spermaceti, that was the primary reason for the commercial whaling of sperm whales for 2 centuries. The spermaceti organ can weigh more than 1,000 kilograms in the largest males. Its function has been debated since it was first examined. The current best understanding is that it serves as an acoustic lens, focusing and directing the sperm whale's echolocation clicks with extraordinary precision, creating a beam of sound that can be aimed and adjusted as the whale navigates and hunts in the dark. The spermaceti oil also changes density as it is heated or cooled, and one hypothesis holds that the whale can use this property to adjust its buoyancy, warming the oil to decrease its density and rise, cooling it to increase density and sink, a passive buoyancy system that would reduce the energetic cost of diving and surfacing. If this is true, the sperm whale's head is simultaneously an acoustic weapon, a navigational instrument, a communication device, and a buoyancy regulator. It is the most multi-purpose organ in the animal kingdom. The social life of sperm whales. This is where the sperm whale reveals itself as something even more extraordinary than a deep-diving predator. Sperm whales live in complex, stable, multi-generational social groups. The female sperm whales and their young live together in groups of 10 to 20 individuals, groups that maintain their composition over decades, groups in which the same individuals who grew up together are still together when they are old, in which grandmothers and mothers and daughters and nieces are all present and all contributing to the functioning of the group. These groups have cultural identities, identifiable differences in behavior and in the specific click sequences they use for communication, differences that are taught to young whales by the adults in their group, and that distinguish one group from another in the same way that dialects distinguish one human community from another. The sperm whale click sequences used for communication are called codas, and they are specific to social groups in a way that has been carefully documented by researchers who have spent years following individual groups and recording their communications. Different groups have different codas. The codas are learned, not inherited, because calves raised in different groups learn the codas of the group they are raised in. The codas function as group identity markers, a way of knowing who is in your group and who is not, a social communication technology that is passed from generation to generation through learning in a species that has been in the ocean for millions of years. The sperm whale has culture in the same rigorous sense that cultural anthropologists use the word. It has socially transmitted behavioral traditions that vary between groups and that are maintained across generations through learning. It is not the only non-human animal that can make this claim, but it is the only non-human animal making this claim in an ocean on a scale of social groups that are stable across decades and that have been maintaining their cultural identities since long before any human was aware that they existed. Breathe slowly. The sperm whale is out there in the deep water, listening to the clicks of its group, knowing who is nearby, the specific patterns of their codas, the underwater dialect of the family that surrounds it. The clicks travel through the water at the speed of sound, reaching the ears of each whale in the group, arriving at slightly different times depending on the distance, and the whale's brain processes those tiny timing differences to build a three-dimensional map of where each group member is. A real-time awareness of the social geography of the group that persists through every dive, through every change in depth and direction, an acoustic social fabric that the group lives inside and that keeps them together in the dark. The right whale, Eubalaena. The name is the darkest joke in the history of marine biology. The right whale was named by the whalers of the 17th century, who called it the right whale to catch because it was the right whale to catch, meaning it was slow, it swam near the coast. It produced enormous quantities of oil, and when you killed it, it floated. The name commemorates its commercial desirability. The North Atlantic right whale is now one of the most endangered large animals on Earth, with a population of approximately 340 individuals and declining. Declining because they are slow and they swim in coastal waters and they get struck by ships and entangled in fishing gear, dying the deaths that their biology made them vulnerable to, long before there were ships large enough to kill them on contact. The right whale's biology, which served it well for millions of years, has become a liability in an ocean full of cargo ships and crab potlines, and the population is not recovering. It may not recover. 340 individuals. The genetic diversity necessary to sustain a population is present, barely. And the births, when they occur, are outnumbered in some years by the deaths. The right whale may go extinct in the wild within the lifetimes of people alive today. The right whale calves are born in the warm waters of the southeastern United States, in the shallow coastal ocean off Georgia and Florida, and they travel north with their mothers to the feeding grounds of the Gulf of Maine and the Bay of Fundy, learning the route that their mothers know, the route that has been traveled by right whales for hundreds of thousands of years. The calves stay with their mothers for their first year, nursing on milk that contains 45% fat, milk so rich and so dense with energy that the calves grow at a rate of almost 3 centimeters per day during their first months of life, growing from a calf of 4 to 5 meters at birth to a juvenile of 9 to 10 meters by the time they are weaned. The mother and calf pair moves slowly through the coastal waters, the calf learning the currents and the landmarks and the geography of a migration route that it will repeat every year of its life, the way its mother repeats it, the way its grandmother repeated it, the cultural transmission of navigational knowledge across generations in a species so reduced in number that each individual is precious in a way that the species was never evolved to manage. The narwhal, Monodon monoceros, the unicorn whale. The tusk, which is the feature that has made the narwhal famous since the Middle Ages, when narwhal tusks were sold as unicorn horns and commanded prices that reflected their supposed magical properties, is not a horn, it is a tooth. Specifically, it is the upper left canine tooth of the male narwhal, which instead of erupting normally grows out through the upper lip in a long spiral, reaching lengths of up to 3 meters in the largest individuals and growing in the left-handed spiral that is the consistent direction, regardless of whether the individual narwhal is right-handed or left-handed in its other behaviors. The tusk grows throughout the narwhal's life, adding new material at the base as it lengthens, maintaining the spiral and the characteristic clockwise twist that you can see in every narwhal tusk ever examined. About 1 in 500 female narwhals also grows a tusk, shorter and straighter than the males, and very occasionally a male grows 2, 1 from each upper canine. What is the tusk for? This is a question that has been studied seriously for decades and that has produced a range of answers, none entirely satisfying, and the most recent research has added a new dimension that was not previously suspected. The tusk contains millions of nerve channels that run from its surface to its interior, nerve channels that connect to the narwhal's sensory nervous system and that may allow the narwhal to detect changes in pressure, temperature, salinity, and possibly electrical fields through the tusk's surface. The tusk may be a sensory organ of extraordinary sensitivity, a long wand of neural tissue that the narwhal holds in front of it as it swims, reading the water with it, detecting the chemical and physical gradients of its Arctic environment through a surface equipped with 10 million nerve endings. The tusk is also used in displays between males, tusks being crossed and rubbed together in a behavior called tusking that appears to be social or competitive, though whether it is primarily a display of fitness to females or a competitive interaction between males or both is not definitively established. The tusk may be all of these things simultaneously, as the most complex organs often are. The narwhal lives in the Arctic, in the sea ice, in conditions that are among the most challenging of any marine mammal's habitat. It migrates seasonally, moving to open water in summer and back under the ice in winter, navigating through leads and polynyas in the ice, surfacing in openings that are sometimes only barely large enough for its body to fit through, breathing in a world where the difference between a surface opening and a dead end under ice is the difference between survival and drowning. The narwhal is extraordinarily well adapted to sea ice, more so than any other cetacean, but the sea ice is changing faster than any other marine habitat on Earth, and the narwhal's adaptations, refined over millions of years of Arctic evolution, are being tested against a rate of change that those millions of years did not prepare them for. The beluga whale, Delphinapterus leucas. The white whale, sometimes called the canary of the sea, because of the extraordinary variety of sounds it produces, chirps and whistles and clicks and squeals and sounds that pass through the hull of a ship or the wall of an aquarium tank with an uncanny resemblance to human conversation heard at a distance. Heard through a wall, not intelligible but clearly communicative, clearly expressive. A voice that suggests a level of communicative complexity that the beluga's reputation has never quite caught up with. The beluga is the only whale that can change the shape of its face. The melon, the rounded fatty structure on the forehead that in most toothed whales is a fixed shape, is in the beluga flexible, a malleable acoustic lens that the whale can reshape by muscular control to change the direction and focus of its echolocation clicks, giving it an adaptability in its acoustic environment that other toothed whales do not have. The beluga's face is expressive in the way that very few animal faces are expressive, moving and shifting, the lips capable of forming shapes that look, to human observers, uncannily like expressions. Though what those shapes communicate to other belugas is a question that is not fully answered. The beluga lives in the cold coastal waters of the Arctic and subarctic, in river estuaries and shallow bays and the margins of sea ice, and it is the whale most likely to be encountered by the people who live in the Arctic, the Inuit, and other indigenous peoples for whom the beluga has been a food source and a cultural presence for thousands of years. The relationship between the beluga and the peoples of the Arctic is one of the most sustained human-whale relationships on Earth, a relationship of mutual familiarity, with the whales returning to the same estuaries and bays where generations of people have known them, where the knowledge of the whale's movements and behaviors is held in the oral traditions of the people who have lived alongside them, knowledge that has accumulated over hundreds of years, and that represents a scientific understanding of beluga behavior that formal science has only recently begun to document with equivalent precision. The orca, Orcinus orca. We should spend some time here because the orca is perhaps the most misnamed animal in popular culture, and perhaps the most cognitively sophisticated non-human animal on Earth after the great apes. The killer whale, as it is often called, is not a whale. It is the largest member of the dolphin family, and the name killer whale is itself a corruption of the Spanish-derived term whale killer, which is what the orca actually is, an apex predator that hunts other whales among many other prey, the only predator of the adult great whales other than humans. The orca is black and white, visually spectacular, identifiable from long distances by the dorsal fin that in adult males can reach 2 meters in height, and it is one of the most widely distributed animals on Earth, found in every ocean from the tropics to the polar seas, from coastal shallows to open ocean, in conditions that range from the warm equatorial Pacific to the waters beneath the Antarctic sea ice. The orca lives in the most complex and most stable social groups of any non-human animal. Orca societies are organized around matrilines, groups of animals descended through the female line from a single grandmother or great-grandmother, and these matrilines are the basic unit of orca social life, persisting for generations with the eldest female, the matriarch, at the center. The matriarch's knowledge is not a metaphor. It is literal and specific and documented. Researchers studying the orca populations of the Pacific Northwest have found that during El Niño events, when prey fish are scarce in the usual feeding areas, the oldest females in the group lead the group to areas where they had found food during previous El Niño events decades earlier, demonstrating a specific ecological memory that extends back 30 or more years and that saves the group from starvation by accessing knowledge that the younger animals do not have. The oldest females are not just reproductive units. They are libraries. They are the holders of ecological knowledge accumulated over half a century of experience in a specific patch of ocean, and their presence in the group increases the survival of their grandchildren during lean years. Male orcas do not leave their mothers. This is unusual among social mammals, where the young disperse at some point in their adolescence to avoid competition with their parents. Male orcas stay with the matriline in which they were born throughout their lives, dependent on their mothers and grandmothers for ecological knowledge and social support in a way that has no parallel among other non-human mammals. A male orca whose mother dies has a significantly elevated risk of death in the years following her death, a risk that increases with age, as if the accumulated dependency of a lifetime becomes, suddenly, a vulnerability when the mother is gone. The male orca is not independent. It is embedded in a maternal social structure so deeply that it cannot function without that structure, in the same way it functioned within it. The orca hunts in groups, and the hunting strategies of different orca populations are among the most complex cooperative behaviors documented in any non-human animal. The orca populations of Norway drive herring into tight balls near the surface using coordinated movements, then stun individual fish with their flukes before eating them, a technique called carousel feeding that requires precise coordination of multiple individuals moving in prescribed roles. The orca populations of Patagonia beach themselves intentionally on steep gravel beaches to catch sea lions at the waterline, a behavior that requires extraordinary precision in timing and wave reading and body position. And that has to be taught to young orcas by their mothers. The teaching process documented over years of field observation, the young watching their mothers beach and then attempting it themselves under supervision, getting stuck and needing to be pushed back into the water by adults when their timing is wrong. The orca populations of Antarctica hunt Weddell seals by creating waves that wash the seals off ice floes, a technique that requires multiple individuals to coordinate their swimming into a specific wave pattern aimed at the specific ice floe where the seal is resting. Different orca populations have different hunting traditions, different preferred prey, different techniques for pursuing that prey, differences that are maintained across generations through learning and that constitute, by any rigorous definition, culture. Let the sound of the water settle around you. The orca clicks are in it somewhere, the high-frequency echolocation pulses that build the orca's picture of its underwater world, and the whistles that carry emotional content and social information between members of the group, and the pulsed calls that are specific to each pod, the dialects of the orca world, the acoustic signatures that tell you which pod you belong to and which you do not. The orca world is full of sound, full of communication, full of the kind of dense social information exchange that we associate with the most cognitively complex animals we know. The orca is doing what it does in every ocean on Earth, right now as you are resting in the quiet. The gray whale, Eschrichtius robustus, the whale of the longest migration. The gray whale travels from its feeding grounds in the Bering and Chukchi Seas off Alaska, where it spends the summer feeding in the shallow, productive Arctic waters, to its breeding grounds in the warm lagoons of Baja California, where it spends the winter giving birth and nursing and mating, a round trip of nearly 20,000 kilometers, the longest migration of any mammal on Earth. The gray whale does not eat during this migration. It lives on the reserves of blubber it accumulated during the summer feeding, and when it arrives at the feeding grounds in the spring, it is lean, sometimes visibly emaciated, and it feeds intensively for the months of Arctic summer to rebuild the reserves it will need for the next migration. The breeding lagoons of Baja California are among the most extraordinary wildlife spectacles on Earth. Shallow, warm, sheltered waters where the gray whales come to give birth, and where the mothers spend the first months of their calves' lives teaching them to surface, to breathe, to nurse. The calves are nursed on milk with an extraordinarily high fat content, gaining hundreds of kilograms per week, and they grow rapidly from their birth size of about 4 to 5 meters to a size at weaning of about 7 or 8 meters, large enough to begin the first northward migration with their mothers in the spring. The mothers and calves travel north together, the calf learning the route, learning the landmarks, learning the currents and the coastal geography that it will use for the rest of its life to navigate the migration. Some researchers believe that the knowledge of specific migration routes is cultural, passed from mother to calf and maintained through learning rather than instinct, though the degree to which this is the case is difficult to establish with certainty because we cannot observe what happens inside the whale's navigational system. The gray whale has a relationship with humans that is unique in the natural world. In the breeding lagoons of Baja California, the gray whales approach boats voluntarily, not in the way that animals approach boats when they have become habituated to them over time and have learned that boats are not threats, but actively and curiously and persistently coming to the side of a boat and holding position there, allowing the people on the boat to touch them, to scratch them, to make physical contact with an animal that could capsize the boat with a single movement of its tail. This behavior, which was documented beginning in the 1970s, and that has become increasingly common since then, has been called the friendlies by the local fishermen who first encountered it, and it is one of the most discussed phenomena in cetacean research. The grey whales come to the boats. They look at the people on the boats. They allow contact. The calves, who have never been in contact with humans before, come with their mothers and allow themselves to be touched by the same hands that 50 years ago would have been the hands of whalers killing those same mothers' grandmothers. The grey whale has apparently forgiven us. Or, perhaps more accurately, the grey whale does not hold a grudge, and the curiosity it feels toward the unfamiliar objects and organisms that enter its lagoon is stronger than any residual wariness from the history of the relationship, if residual wariness is even a concept that applies to a whale's relationship with time and history. The bowhead whale, Balaena mysticetus, the whale that lives longest of all. The bowhead is an Arctic species, heavily built, with a massive head that constitutes nearly a third of its body length, and that is equipped with the longest baleen plates of any whale. Baleen that can reach 4 meters in length, designed for the feeding style of a whale that spends its life in the cold, productive waters of the Arctic and subarctic, filtering the tiny copepods and other small crustaceans that bloom in extraordinary densities in the cold Arctic water. The bowhead uses its enormous head as a battering ram to break through sea ice up to 60 centimeters thick, surfacing for air in conditions that would be impossible for any other whale in the middle of ice fields where most cetaceans cannot go. The bowhead's territory is the sea ice, and it moves through it and under it and through leads and cracks in it with a navigational confidence that reflects a lifetime, or several lifetimes, of experience with ice. The bowhead lives for 200 years. This is not an estimate or a projection. It is a measurement. Harpoon points of a type that has not been manufactured since the mid-19th century have been found in the blubber of bowhead whales killed in recent decades. Harpoons that have been lodged in the whale's flesh for 150 years or more without killing the whale. A physical record of a hunt that failed when everything the hunters knew how to do was not enough to kill the whale they had struck. The amino acid racemization analysis of eye tissue, a technique that measures the age of crystalline lens proteins laid down at birth, has produced confirmed ages of over 200 years for several individuals. A bowhead whale alive today was born when the United States was a young republic. It was alive during the Napoleonic Wars. It was alive when the first photographs were taken. It has been swimming in the Arctic Ocean for 2 centuries in a body that has not aged in the way mammalian bodies typically age, that has maintained its cellular integrity and its immune function and its reproductive capacity across a time span that makes human longevity look brief. The bowhead's longevity research has attracted considerable interest from the medical community because the biological mechanisms that allow a mammal to live for 200 years while maintaining health and function are mechanisms that might, if we understood them, tell us something about aging in all mammals, including ourselves. The fin whale, the sei whale, the minke whale, the bride's whale, the lesser-known members of the rorqual family, the family that includes the blue and the humpback, each of them remarkable, each of them present in the ocean in numbers reduced from historical levels by the same industrial whaling that came so close to eliminating the blue whale, each of them recovering at different rates in different regions. Their recoveries the result of decades of protection and the slow arithmetic of whale reproductive biology. The fin whale is the second largest animal on Earth after the blue whale. The sei whale is one of the fastest, capable of sustained speeds of over 20 knots that few other large whales can match. The minke whale is the smallest of the rorquals, wide-ranging and adaptable, and it is the species that some countries have continued to hunt under the scientific whaling provisions of the IWC moratorium, a legal and ethical controversy that has not been resolved and that continues to generate disagreement between the countries that hunt minkies and the countries that do not. The whale fall. This is something that happens when a whale dies in the open ocean, something that has been studied for only a few decades, but that has revealed one of the most extraordinary ecological processes in the deep sea. When a whale dies and sinks to the seafloor, It becomes in sequence a feast, and then a habitat, and then a mineral resource, and then eventually a reef, a hard substrate colonized by organisms in a succession that can last for decades and that passes through ecological stages as distinct as any other succession in the natural world. The first stage is the mobile scavenger stage, lasting months, during which sleeper sharks and hagfish and crabs and amphipods strip the carcass of its soft tissue. The second stage is the enrichment opportunist stage, lasting years, during which polychaete worms and crustaceans colonize the exposed bones and feed on the organic material soaked into the substrate. The third stage, the sulfophilic stage, lasts for decades, during which the lipid-rich bones, loaded with the fat of a lifetime of feeding, are colonized by bacteria that metabolize the sulfides produced by the anaerobic decomposition of the bone lipids, creating a chemical environment similar to a hydrothermal vent, supporting a community of organisms including tube worms and clams and mussels and crustaceans that are otherwise found only at vent and cold seep environments. A whale fall, by the time it enters its sulfophilic stage, is indistinguishable in its ecology from a hydrothermal vent community. The whale in death becomes a vent. It creates a habitat where none existed, a deep-sea island of chemosynthetic productivity that can persist for decades and that may serve as a dispersal stepping stone for the vent-associated organisms that live on it, allowing them to colonize new vent sites by using whale falls as intermediate habitats between the geologically rare and geographically distant hydrothermal vents. The whale fall is the whale's final ecological contribution, and it is substantial. A large blue whale carcass contains approximately 2,000 kilograms of lipid in its bones alone. Decomposed through the sulfide metabolizing bacteria of the sulfophilic stage, these lipids can support a chemosynthetic community for a century or more. A blue whale that dies in the open ocean creates a habitat that will persist in various forms long after the whale itself has been reduced to the minerals of its bones, and those bones will eventually dissolve in the slightly acidic deep sea water, contributing their calcium and phosphorus to the sediment chemistry, and the sediment will record the whale's presence in its chemistry for thousands of years after the last physical trace of the whale is gone. The whale falls through the water column in death as it dived through it in life, and in both directions it feeds the ocean that fed it, the whale and the krill. The relationship between the great baleen whales and the krill they feed on is not simply a predator-prey relationship. It is a cycle, and the whale is not just the consumer at the top of the cycle, but one of the engines that drives the cycle from the bottom. When a whale feeds, it descends to the depth where krill concentrate and lunges through the krill, consuming tons at a time. But the whale does not stay at depth. It rises, it breathes. And when it breathes at the surface, it also defecates, releasing nutrient-rich fecal matter at the surface, in the sunlit zone where photosynthesis occurs, where the nutrients can immediately stimulate the growth of the phytoplankton that is the base of the food chain and the food of the krill. The whale is not taking nutrients out of the system and putting them somewhere inaccessible. It is cycling them. It is taking nutrients from the deep where krill concentrate and releasing them at the surface where they are most productive, in a nutrient pump that connects the deep ocean to the sunlit surface in a way that would not happen at the same rate without the whale. The whale is the ocean's fertilizer. The whale is part of the system that produces the krill that feeds the whale. The great whales, when they were present in their full historical numbers, were pumping nutrients through the ocean column at a rate that has been estimated to have significantly elevated the productivity of the Southern Ocean and other whale-rich areas. The reduction of whale populations by industrial whaling did not just remove animals from the ocean. It reduced the productivity of the ocean itself, reduced the amount of phytoplankton and krill that the ocean produced, reduced the entire food web in a cascade that descended from the whale, whose presence had been supporting that web all along. The recovery, the good news, the humpback whale, listed as endangered in the 1970s, has recovered to the point where several populations have been delisted from the endangered species list. The global humpback population, estimated at around 80,000 in 1966, is now estimated at around 130,000, still below the pre-whaling estimate of roughly 250,000, but recovering, demonstrably recovering, in populations in both hemispheres. The grey whale, hunted to near extinction in the eastern Pacific by the early 20th century, has recovered to population sizes that are estimated to be at or near its historical levels, a recovery story that is one of the most complete and most celebrated in the history of wildlife conservation. The blue whale's recovery is slower because its biology demands slow recovery, but the population has grown from its post-whaling nadir of perhaps 2,000 to 3,000 to the current estimate of 10,000 to 25,000, still less than 10% of historical levels, but growing slowly and measurably. The sperm whale was not hunted as intensively as the baleen whales because its oil was harder to process, and its populations are estimated to be closer to their historical levels, perhaps 300,000 to 400,000 individuals globally, making it the most abundant of the great whales. The orca was never a significant commercial whaling target, though it was culled in some regions because of its perceived competition with fisheries, and its populations in most areas are considered healthy. The ocean is not what it was. The whales are not what they were in terms of numbers, but there are more of them now than there were at the lowest point, and the direction of change has been positive for most species for most of the past 50 years. And the trajectory, if the protections are maintained, and the threats of ship strikes and entanglement and noise pollution and climate change and prey depletion are managed, is toward an ocean that contains, eventually, something closer to the full ecological contribution that the great whales are capable of making. The breathing at the surface, this is what we return to. The blow, the moment when the whale breaks the surface and opens the blowhole and exhales, and the vapor rises into the air. The blue whale's blow rises 9 meters. The sperm whale's blow is angled forward at 45 degrees, a distinctive shape produced by the position of the single blowhole at the front left of the head, identifiable at long distances by the angle alone. The humpback's blow is wide and bushy. The right whale's blow is V-shaped, the 2 nostrils of the blowhole producing 2 separate columns of vapor that diverge at the top. Each species has a blow that is recognizable to the people who know them, a breath that is identifiable from kilometers away, a signature of presence in the air above the water that says this whale, this species here now breathing. The whale surfaces to breathe and the breath is audible. A loud explosive exhalation. The clearing of airways that have been sealed for however long the whale was diving, followed by the rapid intake of the next breath. The sperm whale's exhalation before a deep dive produces a sound that was described by whalers as a roar, a powerful rush of air audible from a considerable distance. The breath is real and it is loud, and it is the most fundamental fact about the whale, the fact that it is not a fish, the fact that it must return to the surface or die, the fact that it chose the ocean but kept the air, that it went back to the sea from which its ancestors came but never gave up the lungs that its land mammal ancestors evolved, and that this combination, the diving body and the breathing surface, has been the governing condition of the whale's existence for 50 million years. The air is cold tonight, wherever the whale is. The Arctic air above the bowhead's Polynya, the temperate air above the blue whale's feeding grounds, the warm tropical air above the humpback's breeding ground in Hawaii or the Caribbean. In all of them, the blow rises, the vapor disperses, the whale takes the breath it needs and descends again. Down into the dark, down into the pressure, down into the cold or the warm, depending on the species and the season and the depth, down into the ocean that is their world, the world that they have lived in for 50 million years, and that they know in a way we will never know it, with senses calibrated to its chemistry and its sound and its pressure and its currents, reading it constantly with their bodies, navigating it by its magnetic fields and its acoustic landscape and its chemical gradients, living in it and being of it in a way that cannot be learned but only inherited, only evolved, only accumulated across 50 million years of unbroken lineage in the sea. You are very nearly asleep. The breathing has found its slow rhythm. The body is heavy and still. The mind is quieter than it has been all day, the clutter of the daytime clearing away like the water clearing after a whale's descent, settling back into calm. The ocean is out there somewhere in every direction, if you think about it on the scale of the planet, the water that covers most of the surface of the world, and in it, the whales. the blue whale moving through the cold current, the humpback hanging in the warm water singing, the sperm whale descending into the dark, clicking, the orca moving with its family, whistling, the bowhead surfacing through the ice, the grey whale swimming steadily down the coast with her calf beside her, teaching the calf the route that her own mother taught her, the route that has been travelled for thousands of years, the cultural knowledge of the migration, the living inheritance of the ocean. They are there, in the dark water, in the old water, in the water that was here before the first whale, and that will be here after the last one if it comes to that, though it has not come to that yet, and it does not need to come to that if we do not let it. The water holds them, the ocean sustains them, the night is deep, and the breathing is slow and the world is very far away, and the only sound is the ocean, and the only thing in it is the whale, diving and surfacing, breathing and singing and clicking and calling across the dark water to the others, who hear and respond in the language of their kind, old and specific and beautiful and theirs. Sleep now. The whales are breathing at the surface, somewhere in the dark. They have been breathing there for 50 million years. They will be breathing there when you wake. The ocean is keeping them. Sleep. The pilot whale, Globicephala, a medium-sized toothed whale, not large enough to qualify as one of the great whales, but too large to be considered a dolphin in the casual sense. Dark-bodied, round-headed, highly social, living in stable pods of 10 to 30 individuals that maintain their composition over years and decades, in a social structure that resembles, in its stability and its matrilineal organization, the social structure of the orca. The pilot whale is deep diver, capable of dives to more than 1,000 meters in pursuit of squid, and it coordinates these dives socially, groups of animals descending together, hunting together, returning to the surface together, in a cooperation that implies a shared hunting strategy and a social coordination of effort that benefits the group as a whole. The pilot whale is also the species most frequently involved in mass strandings, events in which entire pods swim onto beaches and cannot or will not return to the sea. Events that kill dozens or hundreds of animals in a single occurrence, and that have puzzled scientists for as long as they have been documented, because the mechanisms that cause them are not fully understood, and because the animals that are returned to the water by human intervention frequently restrand themselves, apparently unwilling to separate from the members of their pod who are still on the beach. The pilot whale would rather die than leave its family. Whether that constitutes loyalty or love or something we do not have the right word for, no one can say with certainty. What it constitutes behaviorally, what it produces as an outcome, is an animal that treats the separation from its social group as worse than death. The bowhead whale's songs. We have talked about the humpback as the singer, but the bowhead also sings, and the bowhead's singing is in some ways even more extraordinary than the humpback's, not because it is more complex, but because of what researchers found when they systematically recorded the songs of a bowhead population over a period of 3 years. They found that the bowhead population produced dozens of distinct song types over the 3 years of the study, far more than expected for a population of this size, and that the songs changed constantly, new songs appearing and old songs disappearing, with very little repetition of any single song from one season to the next. The humpback's songs change slowly, new elements being added to an existing framework over months and years. The bowhead appears to generate entirely new songs every season, as if the animal is improvising rather than performing a rehearsed piece, as if the creativity of the bowhead's musical output is not constrained by the need to maintain a tradition, but is, instead, ongoing invention, constant novelty, perpetual composition. A bowhead whale alive for 200 years, generating new songs every winter, would have produced hundreds of distinct song types over its lifetime. The bowhead may be the most musically creative animal on Earth, and it lives in the Arctic and sings in the dark under the ice, and almost no one knows it. The Amazon River dolphin, Inia geoffrensis, not a whale in the strict sense, but a cetacean, a toothed whale of the inland waterways, the most evolved of the river dolphins, a freshwater cetacean that has been in the rivers of South America for millions of years, and that has evolved in isolation from its marine relatives into something distinct, pink, slow, flexible in ways that marine dolphins are not, with a neck that can turn from side to side, and a long beak adapted for catching fish in the shallow, debris-strewn, often turbid water of the floodplain forests. The Amazon River dolphin, called boto in Brazil, is culturally significant to the riverine peoples of the Amazon, embedded in a mythology that gives it a semi-human status, the ability to transform into a seductive human at night. The role of a spirit animal in several indigenous traditions. The boto is protected by this mythology in many communities, considered bad luck to kill, and the cultural protection has contributed to its survival in areas where other large aquatic animals have been eliminated. But the boto is declining as the Amazon is degraded, as mercury from illegal gold mining accumulates in the fish it eats, as fishing nets entangle it, as the floodplain forests that are its habitat are converted to agriculture and cattle ranching. The boto is not a great whale, it is a river ghost, a pink shadow in brown water, and it is disappearing from the rivers it has inhabited for millions of years in the same quiet way that river creatures tend to disappear, without the public attention that attends the decline of the great ocean whales, without the international campaigns and the documentary films, in the murky water of a river that fewer and fewer people are watching. The Song of the Ocean. The humpbacks are singing in Hawaii and in Tonga, and in the breeding grounds of the Indian Ocean. The bowheads are singing under the ice of the Beaufort Sea. The sperm whales are clicking in the deep water of the Atlantic. The belugas are whistling in the estuaries of the Arctic. The blue whales are calling in the infrasound below the threshold of human hearing, their calls traveling for thousands of kilometers through the acoustic channels of the deep ocean. The ocean is full of whale voice, has been full of whale voice for 50 million years, and before the Industrial Revolution reduced it by killing so many of the singers, the ocean was louder with whale sound than it has been in the past 2 centuries. The deep acoustic channels, transmitting the voices of hundreds of thousands of individuals across ocean basins in a biological soundscape that we have only begun to understand by listening to what remains of it now that so much of it is gone. The noise that we have added to the ocean, the ships, the sonar, the seismic surveys, the industrial machinery of the human economy in the sea have together raised the background noise level of the ocean to the point where the acoustic range of whale communication has been reduced in some areas by 90%. The calls that once carried for hundreds of kilometers, now masked by the noise of the human ocean at ranges of tens of kilometers or less. The whales have responded. Blue whales have shifted the frequency of their calls in some populations, singing at lower frequencies in recent decades than they did in the mid-20th century. Humpbacks in noisy areas have been documented extending the length of their songs, apparently to increase their detectability in a noisier environment. Some species have shifted their calling times to avoid the peak hours of ship traffic noise. The whales are adapting, but the pace of acoustic change in the ocean is faster than any environmental change that whale communication systems were evolved to handle, and the disruption is real and documented and ongoing, and its effects on the social cohesion and navigational ability and reproductive success of whale populations are areas of active and urgent research. The right whale and the ship strike. The North Atlantic right whale, 340 individuals, slow-moving, surface-oriented, blubber-heavy, not quick enough to clear the path of a large cargo ship in the time between when the ship's sonar detects it and when the ship can slow or maneuver. The largest ships cannot stop for miles, they cannot turn quickly. A right whale in the shipping lane of the northeastern United States is in genuine danger from the ship traffic of the port of Boston and New York and Halifax. And the strikes happen, documented strikes, known individuals killed, their bodies found floating with the marks of a ship's propeller in their flesh. The US government requires ships to slow to 10 knots in designated right whale habitat during certain periods. The measure helps. It does not solve the problem. The right whale remains in the most dangerous situation of any large whale, not because of deliberate hunting, but because of the incidental costs of sharing an ocean with the infrastructure of the modern economy. The whale watch. The industry that has replaced in many coastal communities the whaling industry that preceded it. The boats that go out from Gloucester and Provincetown and Husavik and Kaikoura and the Azores to find the whales that their predecessors went out to kill, carrying tourists instead of harpoons, generating revenue through the experience of proximity to living whales rather than through the processing of dead ones. The whale watch industry generates more than $2 billion per year globally. It employs thousands of people. It creates an economic interest in the survival of whale populations, in communities where the economic interest used to be in their destruction. The whale is worth more alive, repeated visits over years, than it was worth dead, a single extraction of oil and bone. This is the most practical argument for whale conservation, and it is the argument that has worked in the most places, because it speaks in a language that is universally understood, the language of economic interest, the language of what sustains a community. The whale watch does not restore the whales that were killed, but it creates the conditions in which the whales that survived the killing have a constituency, people who have seen them, who remember them, who want them to continue to exist, who tell their children about the morning they were out on the water, and a humpback breached 30 meters from the boat, and the spray reached them, and for a moment they were wet and astonished, and absolutely certain that the world was larger and stranger, and more extraordinary than they had previously understood. The memory of the whale, the long-lived whales, the bowhead at 200 years, and the sperm whale at 60, and the orca matriarch at 90, carry in their nervous systems a memory of the ocean that encompasses more change than almost any other organism on Earth experiences. A bowhead whale alive today has experienced the decline of the sea ice. It has experienced the change in the distribution and abundance of its prey. It has experienced the increase in the noise level of the Arctic Ocean as ship traffic through the northern sea route has grown. It has experienced the change in the temperature of the water, the acidification, the shifts in the currents. It has been navigating and feeding and breeding in an ocean that has been changing under it for 2 centuries, and it has adapted to each change with the tools it has, the cognitive flexibility and the ecological memory, and the social knowledge that its biology provides. And it has survived, and it is still there, still surfacing through the ice in the Arctic, still breathing the cold air that the Arctic provides. The whale does not know that the ice is shrinking. It knows that the ice is different than it was in the areas where it feeds, that the leads it has used for decades are changing, that the concentrations of prey it has relied on have shifted, and it adjusts its behavior in response to what it knows, not to what we know about why. The whale's response to climate change is behavioral, practical, the same kind of practical adjustment that all organisms make to changing environmental conditions, moving to where the conditions are better, adjusting the timing of migrations, adjusting the depth and location of feeding. Whether these adjustments are sufficient to sustain the population through the rate of change that is currently occurring in the Arctic is a question that the research cannot yet answer definitively. The bowhead has survived enormous changes in the Arctic over its evolutionary history, including the ice ages and the warm periods that preceded and followed them. Whether it can survive the pace of change that the current moment is producing is genuinely uncertain, and the uncertainty is not comfortable to hold. The night is very deep now, and the ocean is very old, and the whales have been in it for longer than almost anything else that currently breathes air on this planet, and they are still there, and they will be there tomorrow if we let them be. If we make the choices that keep the ocean habitable, and the ships slow enough, and the fishing gear safe enough, and the noise level manageable enough, and the climate stable enough for the biology that 50 million years of evolution has produced. That is what the whales need from us. That is the sum of it. They do not need our intervention. They do not need our management. They do not need us to do anything for them, except to stop doing the things to the ocean that make it harder for them to be what they are. The ocean was their home before it became ours. It will remain their home after whatever we make of it. The question is whether what we make of it leaves room for the whales, for the song and the click and the blow and the breach, for the matriarch's memory of where the food was 30 years ago, for the calf learning the migration route beside its mother, for the bowhead surfacing through the ice in the Arctic dawn into the cold air that is, for the bowhead, exactly the air it belongs to. The breathing is very slow now. The body is very still. The mind is very quiet. The ocean is out there in the dark and the whales are in it, doing what they have done for 50 million years, which is to breathe at the surface and dive into the depths and communicate across the distances and sing in the dark and remember the ocean across lifetimes that span centuries. They are there. They are real. They are the ocean's longest story. Sleep now. The whales are breathing. They will be breathing when you wake. The ocean is theirs, and they are keeping it. And you are very nearly asleep, and the night is dark and wide and old, and the blow rises in the dark somewhere over the water, and the vapor disperses, and the whale descends again, and the ocean receives it, and the night holds everything, as it always has, as it always will. Sleep. The migration as a form of knowledge. When a female humpback whale makes her first northward migration from the warm Hawaiian breeding waters to the cold feeding grounds of the Gulf of Alaska, she is not following an instinct encoded purely in her genes. She is following her mother. She learned the route by traveling it with her mother in the first year of her life, a calf learning the calendar of the ocean, the timing of the journey, the direction, the landmarks, the currents, the sequence of environments that marks the way north. This is knowledge transmission. This is learning. In an animal that we have spent most of human history assuming was operating on fixed instinct. The migration is not hardwired. It is taught. And what this means is that a mother who is killed before her calves have completed their first migration leaves behind calves who do not know the route, who must discover it imperfectly through their own trial and error, or by following other adults who are not their mothers and whose routes may not be optimal for them. The loss of a mother whale is not just the loss of an individual. It is the loss of a teacher. The intergenerational transmission of ecological knowledge, of migration routes and feeding grounds and cultural traditions is part of the whale's inheritance and part of what makes whale society function. And every individual lost from that society is a gap in the transmission of knowledge that will take years and possibly generations to fill. The sperm whale's family. The group of female sperm whales and their young that moves together through the tropical and subtropical oceans has a structure that the researchers who have studied it most carefully describe as a family in the fullest social sense of the word. The animals in the group know each other. They have known each other for years, for decades in many cases. The older females recognize the younger ones as animals they have known since birth. The younger females recognize the older ones as figures of authority and experience whose behavior they attend to, whose presence at a feeding area signals that the feeding area is productive, whose departure from an area signals that it is time to leave. The group babysits. When a sperm whale mother dives deep in pursuit of squid, she cannot take her calf with her, because calves cannot dive to the depths that the adults reach. Other females in the group remain at the surface with the calves, not their own calves, the calves of other females, watching over them, keeping them company, preventing them from wandering away from the group. Sperm whale babysitting has been directly observed and documented. It is not a projection of human social organization onto an animal. It is a behavior that exists, that has been watched and filmed. That serves a clear function in the social life of the group. The sperm whale is not alone in its family. The family surrounds it. The family protects it. The family transmits to it the knowledge it needs to survive in the deep ocean, the cultural inheritance of a lineage that has been hunting squid in the deep water for millions of years. The blue whale calf, born at around 7 meters long and 2 tons in weight, the largest infant of any animal on Earth. The blue whale calf nurses on its mother's milk for about 6 to 7 months, gaining as much as 90 kilograms per day in the first weeks of its life, growing faster than any other animal, powered by milk that is as thick as toothpaste and 45% fat. By the time it is weaned, it is around 15 meters long and has more than doubled its birth weight. This is the most intensive period of growth in any mammal's life, concentrated into the brief nursing period before the calf is weaned and must begin to feed independently on krill, learning to identify and pursue and lunge feed on concentrations of krill that are dense enough to be worth the energetic investment of each lunge. The calf's first independent feedings are clumsy, inefficient. The coordination of the enormous body not yet fully developed for the complex hydrodynamics of the lunge. It improves. Within a season, the young blue whale is feeding with something like the efficiency of an adult, and it will spend the next several decades refining that efficiency, growing larger, accumulating the experience of many seasons of feeding in many different conditions in many different parts of the ocean, until it is itself an adult of the full 3 decades or more of maturity that a blue whale carries. The blue whale's lifespan is estimated at 80 to 90 years. In those 80 or 90 years, it will make dozens of migrations between feeding and breeding grounds, thousands of lunge feeding sequences in the cold productive waters, where krill bloom perhaps half a dozen births if it is female. A life measured in the vast distances of the open ocean and the cold tons of krill and the infrasound calls that carry its voice for thousands of kilometers. And then it will die, and it will sink, and it will become a whale fall, and the ocean will receive it as it received every whale before it, converting the matter of its enormous body back into the nutrients that produced the krill that sustained it, closing the loop, completing the cycle, doing what the ocean has always done with the matter of its largest inhabitants. The sound of the ocean at night, the biological soundscape of the deep. Below the ships and the industrial noise of the human surface world, the ocean has a sound of its own, a sound that is older than any human sound, older than language, older than music, older than fire. The snapping of shrimp, the chorus of fish, the distant low pulse of the whale calls, the creaking of the continental shelves, the deep percussion of underwater earthquakes felt as vibration rather than sound by the surface world. The whale moves through this soundscape the way we move through the visible world, reading it, interpreting it, navigating by it, using it to locate prey and predators and family members and the orientation cues of a known ocean. The ocean's sound is the ocean's version of light, the primary medium of information at depth, where actual light has long since been extinguished, and where the only illumination is biological. The whale sees the ocean with its ears in the deep, and what it sees is a landscape of sound that we can record and map and measure, but that we cannot experience from the inside, because we do not have the biology for it, the auditory processing of an animal that evolved over 50 million years to read the ocean in the dark, the gentleness of the whale. This is not a romantic projection. This is what the people who have spent the most time with whales consistently report, the divers and the researchers and the naturalists and the whale watch guides, who have been in the water with humpbacks and sperm whales and grey whales over decades of encounters. The gentleness is real in the behavioral sense, a consistent tendency of large whales to avoid contact with small objects in their environment, including human divers, that amounts to a care and a precision of movement that their enormous size makes doubly remarkable. A humpback whale that is curious about a diver and approaches the diver closely enough to examine it moves with a delicacy and a control that is physically impressive. 50 tons navigating within a meter of a person and making no contact, the great tail fin sweeping the water with a precision that suggests an awareness of the diver's position relative to the fin that is moment to moment and exact. The whale is not being cautious in the sense of being afraid. The whale is being careful in the functional sense of controlling its body precisely in a complex spatial environment, and the precision it exercises is, in the context of its size, extraordinary. The world is very quiet now. The breathing is very slow. The mind has gone to the quiet place that the ocean and the whales and the dark water have been preparing it for, the place where the day's events are far away, and the only things close are the simple physical facts of being here, the body's weight on the surface beneath it, the slow movement of air in and out, the darkness and the quiet and the coming sleep. The whale is at the surface somewhere breathing. The calf is beside its mother, breathing. The matriarch of the orca pod is somewhere in the Pacific, moving with her family, breathing. The bowhead is under the ice in the Arctic, breathing through the polynya it has found or made, the cold Arctic air filling its enormous lungs. The blue whale is somewhere in the Southern Ocean, calling in frequencies below human hearing, the call traveling for thousands of kilometers in the deep acoustic channel of the ocean, reaching other blue whales that are also calling, a conversation at the scale of ocean basins, conducted in the dark, in the cold, in the ancient medium of water. They are there. They have always been there. The ocean that surrounds this planet has had whales in it for 50 million years without interruption, through every change and every catastrophe and every rearrangement of the world, and they are there tonight, doing what they have always done, being what they have always been, filling the ocean with their presence and their sound and their enormous, patient lives. The night holds them. The ocean holds them. You are asleep. And somewhere in the dark water, the blow rises one more time into the cold air and disperses, and the whale descends. And the ocean is still, and the breathing continues, and the dark is wide, and you are very nearly gone into the sleep that waits at the end of this, the sleep that is as old as the ocean and as quiet as the deep water and as dark as the place where the whale hunts, far below the surface, far below the light, in the old dark water that holds everything. Sleep. The minke whale and the Arctic sea ice. The smallest of the rorquals, barely 10 meters in the largest individuals, is also one of the most numerous and one of the most adaptable, found in every ocean from the tropics to both polar regions, feeding on a wider range of prey than any other rorqual, taking fish and krill and copepods and small schooling species depending on what the local ocean provides. The minke whale of the Antarctic, Balænoptera bonarensis, different from the North Atlantic minke in ways significant enough that some taxonomists treat them as separate species, has a relationship with the Antarctic sea ice that is as intimate as the bowhead's relationship with Arctic ice, swimming through the leads and under the ice, surfacing in cracks and polynyas, feeding in the dense aggregations of krill that accumulate at the ice edge where the cold polar water meets the warmer water of the open ocean. The Antarctic minke is the most abundant baleen whale in Antarctic waters, perhaps 500,000 individuals, the whale that benefited most dramatically from the removal of the great whales from the Southern Ocean by industrial whaling in the 20th century, filling the ecological role vacated by the blue whales and fin whales that had been hunted to depletion, expanding its own population into the krill abundance that was no longer being consumed by the larger species. The recovery of the blue whale and fin whale populations may eventually reduce the krill available to the minke, a biological rebalancing that will take decades to manifest. The slow arithmetic of whale populations and krill dynamics playing out on the timescale of whale generations. The sperm whale and the giant squid, the great unwitnessed battle of the deep ocean. The encounter between a sperm whale and a colossal squid at depth in total darkness, at pressures that would kill any human observer, is one of the most dramatic events in the natural world that no human has ever seen directly, and that we can only reconstruct from the evidence it leaves behind. The sperm whale's skin, in many individuals, is marked with circular scars from the toothed suckers of large squid, scars that record the dimensions of the animal that left them, that allow researchers to calculate the size of the squid that produced them and to determine whether those squid were colossal squid, Mesonicoteuthis hamiltoni, or the merely giant Architeuthis dux. The largest scars are from squid that, based on the sucker diameter, were the size of a small car. The sperm whale was attacked by or attacked an animal the size of a small car in total darkness at pressures of 200 or 300 atmospheres, and the encounter left its mark on the skin of the whale in scars that lasted years. What happened in the water between the whale and the squid, whether the squid fought and lost or was stunned by the whale's click beam before it could fight, whether the whale was injured or merely marked, whether the encounter lasted seconds or minutes, we will probably never know with certainty, because it happens in conditions that we cannot currently reach and survive. The evidence is the skin of the whale. The skin of the whale says it happened. The skin of the whale says it was large. The rest is the imagination, and the imagination, confronted with what is known, tends toward the dramatic, because the dramatic is, in this case, almost certainly accurate. The whale in human culture. The presence of the whale in human thought and human story goes back as far as human thought and human story go, because the whale was always there, visible from shore, visible from the boats of the first seafarers, too large to ignore, too strange to fully understand, present in the mythologies of every coastal people, in a way that reflects both the awe the whale inspires and the use the whale provided. The Inuit mythology of the beluga, the Norse mythology of the serpent of the deep, that may have been based on encounters with large whales, the biblical story of Jonah swallowed by a great fish that is almost certainly imagined as a whale, the Japanese traditions of whale veneration in communities that also hunted whales, the Pacific Islander traditions in which the whale is a navigator and a guide, the American whaling tradition that produced Moby Dick, which is the most important novel in American literature, and which is, at its center, a meditation on what it means for a small and fragile thing to pit itself against something vast and ancient and indifferent. The whale has been in human consciousness for as long as there have been humans near the ocean, and the complexity of what the whale means to human culture. The fear and the awe and the utility and the beauty and the horror of the hunt and the wonder of the living animal is not separable from the complexity of what the whale actually is, which is one of the largest and strangest and most cognitively sophisticated animals that has ever shared this planet with us. Melville described the whale as the ungraspable phantom of life. He meant it as a metaphor for the unknowable, for the things that cannot be caught no matter how obsessively you pursue them. But he was also describing the whale accurately. The whale is, in the literal sense, difficult to grasp. Its life is mostly invisible to us, conducted at depths we cannot reach. In darkness we cannot see. In an acoustic world we cannot hear without instruments. In social structures we are only beginning to understand. Across distances that make sustained observation nearly impossible. What we know about whales is remarkable, but what we do not know is vast. The whale lives most of its life out of our sight in the deep water, and the moments when it surfaces, when it breathes, when it breaches or spy hops or lobtails in the shallower waters where we can observe it, are the moments when the whale enters our world briefly and then descends again into its own, which is the ocean, which is most of the planet, which is not ours. The blow is the whale's signature, the single most visible sign of its presence, the column of vapor that rises from the blowhole when the whale exhales at the surface, the sign that has drawn the eyes of every ocean-going human since the first boat went to sea. The whale watcher sees the blow first, before the back, before the dorsal fin, before any other part of the animal. The blow says something is here, something large, something breathing. And then the whale is visible for a few seconds or a few minutes, and then it dives, and the blow disperses, and the surface closes over where it was, and the ocean is unbroken again, and you watch the place where it was for a few more seconds before looking elsewhere, before the eye is drawn by the next blow, a few hundred meters away, rising in the cold air. The next blow, and the next, and the next. The night is as deep as it gets. The breathing is as slow as it goes. The body is fully settled. The mind is very nearly gone, drifting in the quiet, the way the marine snow drifts in the deep water, slowly, without direction, without urgency, without any destination except the bottom where the rest is. The whale is at the surface. The breath rises. The whale descends. The night holds everything. The ocean holds everything. The 50 million years holds everything. And you are there, in it, part of it, in the way that everything that breathes air is part of the story of life on a planet that spent most of its history covered in an ocean that the whales have known longer than almost anything else that currently breathes. We are going to the bottom. Not the abyss, not the crushing dark of the Hadal Zone, not the place where the pressure would kill you in an instant and where the cold is absolute and permanent. We are going somewhere shallower than that, but no less strange. We are going to the sandy floor, to the rubble fields and the grass beds and the mudflats and the wide open plains of the shallow sea, to the interface between the water and whatever is beneath it, the seafloor, the bottom of the sunlit world, the place where the ocean touches the solid earth and where a family of animals has been living for more than 200 million years in a form so perfectly adapted to that particular existence that evolution has barely touched it since. We are going to spend tonight with rays. Find your position now. Let the weight of your body press down into the surface beneath you, the way a ray presses down into the sand of the seafloor, settling, flattening, becoming part of the substrate, the boundary between itself and the bottom growing indistinct. Your breathing is slowing. The light in the room is low or gone entirely. There is nothing required of you for the next hour except to be here, in the quiet, in the dark, and to let the ocean in. The rays have been on the seafloor since before the dinosaurs walked on the land above them. They were here before the current oceans had their current shapes, before the continents had finished their migrations to their current positions. before the Atlantic Ocean existed. They are among the most ancient of the ancient animals, and they are there right now, in the sand, invisible, waiting, being exactly what they have always been. Let that settle into your body the way the sand settles after a ray has disturbed it, slowly, particle by particle, coming to rest. 200 million years. The rays predate the Atlantic Ocean by 150 million years. The Atlantic did not exist when the first rays were pressing themselves into the seafloor of the ancient Tethys Sea, an ocean that is now mostly dry land. That became the Mediterranean and the Black Sea, and the mountains of southern Europe and the deserts of the Middle East as the continents moved and the seafloor was subducted under the growing land. The rays survived the closing of the Tethys. They survived the opening of the Atlantic. They survived the 5 mass extinctions that have punctuated the history of complex animal life on this planet, each one killing more than half of all species, each one rearranging the ecology of the ocean in ways that took millions of years to stabilize, and each time the rays emerged on the other side, still flat, still on the bottom, still pressing themselves into the sand and waiting for whatever the ocean chose to bring to them. The ray is a shark. This is the thing most people do not know, and it changes everything about the way you look at them. The rays are not a separate group of animals that happen to look like squashed fish. They are cartilaginous fish, chondrichthyans, the same ancient lineage as the sharks, and the ray body plan is a modification of the shark body plan rather than an invention of its own. The ray is a shark that chose the bottom. Over millions of years of evolution, the body that was a shark became the body that is a ray. The torso flattening and widening as the pectoral fins grew enormous and merged with the sides of the head, the tail thinning and lengthening or shortening depending on the species, the eyes moving from the sides of the head to the top, the mouth moving from the front of the head to the underside, the entire body reorganizing itself for a life pressed against the seafloor rather than swimming through the open water. The result is an animal that looks nothing like a shark, but that has the shark's skeleton of cartilage, the shark's rows of replacement teeth, the shark's ampullae of Lorenzini for detecting electrical fields, the shark's lateral line for sensing pressure changes in the water, the shark's olfactory system for reading the chemical landscape of the ocean. The ray is a shark in flat clothing. It is the shark reimagined for the floor, refined for the sand, perfected for the life of an animal that does not hunt through the water column, but waits for the water column to bring the hunting to it. Close your eyes now, or let them go soft and unfocused. We are on the seafloor. The water above us is clear and sunlit, the light coming down through it in long columns that shift with the movement of the surface far above, making patterns on the sand that move and dissolve and reform. Never the same twice. The sand is fine and pale, and it extends in every direction as far as the scattered visibility of the shallows allows you to see, broken here and there by a patch of seagrass or a coral head or a cluster of rubble, but mostly sand, mostly flat, mostly still. And in the sand, invisible, the rays. You would not see them if you did not know to look. This is the first thing to understand about the ray, the thing that makes it so extraordinary and so easy to overlook. The ray does not look like an animal. It looks like the seafloor. The upper surface of most ray species is patterned in ways that match their preferred substrate with a precision that seems almost deliberate, almost designed mottled browns and grays and tans that reproduce the color and texture of the sand or the rubble or the mud where the individual lives, and augmented by the ray's behavior of partially burying itself, using its pectoral fins to fan sand over the edges of its body until it is covered to the wing line, until only the eyes and the spiracles, the breathing holes behind the eyes, are clearly visible, and sometimes not even those. The ray becomes the seafloor, not in the metaphorical way of saying an animal is well camouflaged, in the nearly literal way of saying that looking at the seafloor where a ray is resting and looking at the seafloor where no ray is resting are two things that are, without the specific knowledge of what to look for and the specific search image that knowledge provides, indistinguishable. The ray breathes through spiracles. This is one of the anatomical solutions to the problem of being an animal that rests face down on the seafloor and that needs to breathe. Most fish breathe by drawing water in through the mouth and pushing it out through the gills. If you are lying on the seafloor with your mouth pressed into the sand, this is not convenient. The ray solved this problem by evolving spiracles, openings on the top of the head behind the eyes that connect to the gill chamber, through a passage that bypasses the mouth, allowing the ray to draw water in from above, from the clean open water rather than from the sand-clouded water directly in front of the mouth, and push it out through the gill slits on the underside. The spiracles are small, often barely visible, and they pulsate with the ray's respiratory rhythm, opening and closing with each breath, the only visible sign of the ray's life when it is buried and still. The spiracles are one of those anatomical solutions that appear modest and unremarkable until you think about what problem they are solving, and then they become one of those elegant solutions that evolution arrives at, through the slow accumulation of small advantages, each one barely significant on its own, but collectively producing an animal that can breathe while invisible, that can rest for hours on the seafloor in perfect stillness and complete camouflage without ever interrupting the function of its respiratory system. The stingray. When most people think of rays, they think of stingrays, and the stingray is a reasonable representative of the basic ray plan, an animal that most people in the tropics have encountered or nearly encountered. The flat disc of the body, the long whip-like tail with its serrated venomous spine, the way it lies on the sand in the shallows at low tide, and the way people shuffling along the bottom to avoid stepping on them are doing the right thing. Not because stingrays are aggressive, but because a stingray that is stepped on by a foot that it cannot escape will drive its tail spine into whatever is pressing on it as a pure defensive reflex. The stingray does not seek out feet to sting. The stingray seeks out sandy bottoms on which to rest and feed, and the feet and the bottoms happen to occupy the same space at low tide in the tropics, and the inevitable contact between them is, from the stingray's perspective, an emergency requiring the immediate deployment of its only active defensive weapon. The tail spine is not a stinger in the way that a bee's stinger is a stinger. It is a modified dermal denticle, the same structure as the tiny teeth on the shark's skin, enlarged and elongated, and serrated along its edges and coated with a venom-producing tissue that delivers its payload through the serrations as the spine penetrates flesh. The venom is not lethal to healthy humans in most cases, but it is intensely painful, causing a burning pain that has been described as one of the worst pains a person can experience without dying, a pain that persists for hours despite treatment, and that produces, in the tissue around the wound, a degree of localized damage that is out of proportion to the size of the wound itself, because the venom disrupts the normal function of the cells in the wound margin and produces a necrotic effect that can take weeks to fully resolve. The stingray's venom is a defensive weapon of extraordinary effectiveness for an animal that would otherwise have no defense at all, an animal that is slow and that cannot outswim a predator and that cannot bite in any meaningful way. The spine is the stingray's only deterrent against being eaten. It works. The blue-spotted ribbon-tail ray, Tiniura lima, one of the most visually striking animals on the coral reef. A ray with a body patterned in vivid electric blue spots on an olive green or tan background, with a tail striped in blue and white, an animal that looks nothing like the sand-colored camouflage of the buried stingray and everything like a deliberate advertisement of itself, and that is precisely what it is. The blue-spotted ribbon-tail ray is toxic, not mildly venomous in the way that the buried stingray is defensively armed, but actively toxic, containing in its flesh and mucus compounds that are highly unpleasant for anything that eats it. And the vivid coloration is the warning, the biological equivalent of the bright stripes of a wasp or the vivid red of a poisoned dart frog, a signal that says clearly to any predator with the visual system to read it that this animal is not worth eating. The blue-spotted ribbon-tail ray does not hide. It moves slowly and visibly over the reef, its bright colors in plain sight, relying on its toxicity rather than its concealment for protection, an entirely different survival strategy from the buried stingray, using the same ocean and the same reef and arriving at a completely different solution to the same problem of being small and relatively defenseless in a world full of things that eat small and relatively defenseless animals. Let your breathing slow a little more. The reef is quiet above us, and the sandy areas between the coral heads are where the rays move. The blue-spotted ribbon-tail rays drifting over the sand in the slow, unhurried way of animals that have nothing to fear. The buried stingrays invisible in the patches of flat sand between the coral heads, identifiable only by the faint outline of a disc shape under a thin layer of sand, if you know exactly what you are looking at. Both strategies work. Both strategies have been working for millions of years in the same reef, on the same sand, in the same warm, clear water of the tropical Indo-Pacific, where both species live. The ocean is large enough for both solutions, has room for the hider and the advertiser, has resources for the animal that waits and the animal that moves, and the reef is complex enough to accommodate them both without either crowding the other out. The manta ray, Manta birostris. We should spend time here because the manta ray is perhaps the most spectacular animal in the ocean that most people have never heard described accurately, an animal whose reality is more impressive than any description and whose presence in the water around a reef produces, in virtually everyone who encounters it, a response that is closer to awe than to any other emotion. The manta ray is the largest ray in the ocean. The oceanic manta reaches a wingspan of 7 meters, a disc of muscle and cartilage, as wide as a large car, is long, moving through the open water above the reef or in the blue ocean with a grace that is absolutely incongruous with its size, the great wings rising and falling in slow strokes that look less like swimming and more like flying. The animal moving through its medium with the unhurried confidence of something that has nothing to fear and nowhere urgent to be. The manta is a filter feeder. Like the whale shark, like the basking shark, the largest ray in the ocean feeds on the smallest prey, drawing water through its open mouth, concentrating the plankton and small crustaceans on the filtering apparatus of the gill arches, and swallowing the concentrated slurry of tiny organisms that remain when the water has been expelled. The cephalic fins, the 2 lobes that extend from the front of the head like horns and that give the manta its alternative name of devil ray, are not for navigation or communication. They are for feeding flexible funnels that the manta extends and curls to direct water into the open mouth during feeding, increasing the volume of water it can process in a given time and allowing it to concentrate on particular patches of plankton-rich water with a targeting precision that increases its feeding efficiency. The horns of the manta are tools. The devil of the devil ray is a farmer. The manta's brain is the largest of any fish relative to body size. This fact, when it first became known to the broader scientific community, produced significant revision of assumptions about what a ray was capable of, because the assumption had been that rays were simple animals, reactive rather than cognitive, operating on instinct in ways that did not require the kind of complex neural processing that a large brain implies. The manta has a large brain. The manta has also, in behavioral observations, demonstrated cognitive abilities that are consistent with that brain size. Manta rays have been observed at cleaning stations, reef locations where cleaner fish remove parasites from visiting animals, behaving in ways that suggest they know where the cleaning stations are and that they visit them deliberately and repeatedly rather than encountering them by chance. Manta rays have been observed returning to specific locations at specific times in ways that suggest a spatial memory for places and a temporal memory for the conditions at those places. Manta rays in captivity, a small number of individuals that have been kept in large aquariums, have passed what is known as the mirror test, the behavioral test that is considered an indicator of self-awareness in animals, recognizing their own reflection as themselves rather than as another individual, a cognitive ability previously documented in humans, great apes, elephants, dolphins, and a small number of other species. The manta ray may be self-aware. The largest ray in the ocean, gliding through the blue water on 7-meter wings, may know that it exists. The manta aggregates in some locations in numbers that are, to human observers, extraordinary, gathering above seamounts and in channels between islands where upwelling concentrates the plankton they feed on. Dozens of individuals circling in the same column of water in a slow vortex that researchers who have encountered these aggregations describe as one of the most beautiful things in the natural world. The wings of each manta are barely a meter from the wings of the mantas above and below and beside it in the column, each individual moving in the same slow circle, the entire aggregation turning together like the mechanism of a vast biological clock, feeding in the rich plankton column and occasionally breaking away to spiral upward to the surface and breach. The full 7-meter wingspan clearing the water, the enormous body hanging in the air for a fraction of a second before crashing back down in an explosion of spray. The manta breaches. An animal as flat and as wide as a living carpet launches itself completely out of the water and becomes for a moment a thing that is in neither the water nor entirely in the air, suspended at the boundary between the two mediums it inhabits, and then it falls back into the ocean and the ocean receives it and the feeding continues. The electric ray, torpediniforms, the order of rays that can generate electrical charges sufficient to stun prey, producing them through specialized organs derived from modified muscle tissue that are embedded in the disc of the body and that can discharge at voltages of up to 220 volts in the largest species, enough to stun a fish or a crab outright, and enough to give a human being an unpleasant and memorable shock. The electric ray was known to the ancient Greeks, who used it medically, placing the living animal on the body of a patient, suffering from headache or gout and allowing it to discharge, the electrical shock apparently providing some relief from the pain through a mechanism that the ancient Greeks did not understand, but that is not entirely dissimilar from the mechanism of modern electrical pain therapy. The Latin name torpedo, from which we get the English word torpedo, the naval weapon, was applied to these rays because of their ability to stun, and because the discharge, when encountered unexpectedly, produces a shock of surprising force. The electric ray does not move quickly. It is among the slowest of the rays, a sluggish bottom dweller that appears to observation to be incapable of catching anything that is capable of moving at normal fish speeds, and yet it catches fish. It does so by lying motionless on the seafloor, using the same camouflage that other rays use, and then when a fish comes within range, using not its body speed but its electrical discharge, firing the organs in its disc and releasing a charge into the water around it that stuns any fish in the immediate vicinity. The fish's nervous system disrupted by the electrical pulse. The fish unable to swim or to function normally for the few seconds that are sufficient for the electric ray to engulf it in its circular mouth and swallow it. The electric ray is a predator that does not chase. It detonates. The prey is stunned before it knows the predator is there. The torpedo ray's electrical organs are the most powerful biological electrical generators of any animal, 220 volts and as much as 37 amperes, a combination that makes it capable of delivering a genuine shock. The organs are paired, one on each side of the disc, and they can be discharged simultaneously for maximum effect or in sequence, and the ray can discharge multiple times in quick succession before the organs need time to recharge, a few minutes of recovery between bursts. The organs are not only for hunting. They are used in defense. A discharge at the moment of a predator's contact, producing a shock that most predators find sufficiently unpleasant to release the ray immediately, and a signal to other predators at range that the animal they are approaching is not passive prey. The sawfish, Pristidae. At the boundary between ray and shark, an animal so anatomically unusual that its family relationships were debated for centuries, a ray with a body that is more cylindrical than flat, that swims through the water rather than lying on the bottom, that has a rostrum, a snout, extended into a long, flat, tooth-studded blade that can be 2 meters long in the largest individuals, and that is one of the most extraordinary anatomical structures in the ocean. The rostrum is not a weapon in the simple sense. It is a sensory organ and a weapon combined. The teeth along its edges are modified denticles, and the rostrum itself is covered with electroreceptors, the same ampullae of Lorenzini that cover the head of every chondrichthyon, but distributed along the length of the blade so that the sawfish can sweep the rostrum through a school of fish or through the sand above a buried animal and detect through the electrical fields the location of each individual fish or each buried organism within the sweep. And having detected them, the rostrum becomes the weapon, slashing laterally through the school with a speed that stuns or kills multiple fish in a single pass, or digging into the sand to excavate buried prey that the electroreceptors have detected. The rostrum is a combined radar dish and battle axe. The sawfish is critically endangered. All 5 species: the small-tooth sawfish, the large-tooth sawfish, the green sawfish, the dwarf sawfish, the knife-tooth sawfish, all of them critically endangered, all of them reduced from historical abundances that spanned tropical coastlines worldwide to tiny remnant populations in isolated locations eliminated from most of their historical range by the same combination of factors that is eliminating so many large marine animals from the coastal world. Entanglement in fishing nets, habitat destruction of the shallow coastal environments they require for pupping and for juvenile development, and direct take for the rostrum, which commands high prices in some markets for its aesthetic value. The sawfish's rostrum, which took millions of years of evolution to produce, and which is the most sophisticated combined sensory and mechanical tool in the ocean, is sold as a decorative object. The sawfish populations that once ranged across every tropical coastline are now reduced to a few hundred individuals in a handful of locations, and the recovery, if it comes, will be measured in generations of a slow reproducing animal, decades and centuries rather than years. The guitarfish, Rhinobatidi. We have met these animals before in the context of the shark, and they deserve time here in the context of the ray, because they are the middle, the living intermediate between the two body plans, the animal that has not yet chosen, that retains the shark's cylindrical body and shark-like tail, but has begun the ray's expansion of the pectoral fins, so that the head and the front of the body have a flattened, wing-like aspect that is neither purely shark nor purely ray, but genuinely and interestingly both. The guitarfish is the evolutionary document of the transition that produced the rays from the sharks, preserved in living form, a snapshot of a process that took millions of years, and that is readable in the guitarfish's body. In the same way that a text is readable, the early stages of the pectoral fin expansion visible in the shape of the head, the retention of the tail, and the dorsal fins visible in the posterior of the body. The guitarfish is evolution's rough draft, the sketch before the finished work, and it is a living animal that moves through the warm, shallow coastal waters of the tropics with complete success, with no apparent disadvantage to being an intermediate form, evidence that the in-between state is viable, that the journey from shark to ray was not a single transformation, but a long gradual process with functional animals at every stage along the way. The cow-nose ray, Rhinoptera bonasus, a ray of the open water, not the bottom, a pelagic ray that schools in formations numbering in the thousands, moving through the warm water of the Atlantic and the Gulf of Mexico in aggregations so dense and so large that they have been called, by people who have encountered them from boats or from the air, one of the most spectacular wildlife sights on Earth. The ocean's surface broken by the tips of thousands of wings, the school moving together in a coordinated mass that turns and shifts and rises to the surface, and dives in movements so synchronized that they seem to be operated by a single nervous system rather than thousands of individual ones. The cow-nose ray eats shellfish, crushing the shells of clams and oysters with its powerful plate-like teeth in the back of the mouth, and the collapse of large shark populations that once kept the cow-nose ray populations in check led, in the early years of this century, to a population explosion of cow-nose rays in the mid-Atlantic that destroyed shellfish beds that had been productive for generations, a trophic cascade that demonstrated in a specific and economically measurable way the value of the large predators that were no longer there. Breathe slowly. The school of cow-nose rays is somewhere above us, in the open water casting a moving shadow on the sand below, as thousands of wings pass between us and the surface. The shadow is immense, and it moves like a weather system, like a cloud crossing the sun, a biological cloud alive. And then it is past and the light returns to the sand and the bottom is empty again, or appears to be, because the rays are never entirely gone from the ocean floor. The buried ones are still there, the ones covered in sand, invisible, breathing through their spiracles, waiting. The ocean floor is full of invisible rays, full of things that have made themselves part of the substrate, that have accepted the sand's color and the sand's texture and the sand's stillness as their own, that have become indistinguishable from the bottom of the ocean in an act of assimilation so complete that the bottom of the ocean is, in part, alive. The spotted eagle ray, Aetobatus narinari, a ray that is identifiable from a distance by the pattern of white spots on its dark back, an animal of extraordinary grace in the water, moving through the open water above reefs, with a fluidity that has led more than one observer to write that watching it is like watching something that is not swimming, but dreaming of swimming. The movement so smooth and so unforced that it seems to require no effort. The large pectoral fins undulating in slow waves from front to back in the motion called rajiform locomotion, the specific swimming style of the rays, in which the body is held still and only the fins move, producing thrust through the passage of waves along the fin surface, from leading edge to trailing edge. A propulsion system so efficient that the ray appears to be moving with almost no energy expenditure at all, gliding through the water on the wave motion of its own wings. The eagle ray also leaps. Like the manta, it breaches, clearing the water and becoming briefly airborne, though nobody has definitively established why. The leading hypotheses include parasite removal, communication, and courtship display. The breaches of the eagle ray have also been proposed as a form of play, a use of the body's capability for its own sake, in an animal whose locomotor system is capable of generating forces that exceed what staying in the water requires and that finds expression, occasionally, in the explosive translation from water to air. The thornback ray, Raja clavata, a ray of the temperate waters of the North Atlantic and the Mediterranean, covered on its upper surface with spines and thorns that give it a rough, armored texture that function as passive defense against predators attempting to swallow the ray from above. The thornback is not dramatically large, perhaps a meter across the disc in the largest individuals, but it is one of the most studied rays in the world because it is common in the waters around Britain and Ireland and the rest of the European coast, accessible to the scientists who have done the most work on ray biology, and because it has historically been commercially fished under the name of skate, appearing on the menus of European restaurants in the traditional preparation of skate wing in brown butter, a dish that has been eaten in France and Britain for centuries. The thornback's populations have declined significantly from their historical levels in most of the seas where they have been fished, the same pattern that characterizes every commercially exploited elasmobranch, because the thornback is slow to mature, produces small numbers of eggs, and cannot replace itself fast enough to sustain the extraction rates that commercial fisheries impose on it. The rays reproduce through egg cases. The mermaid's purses that wash up on beaches around the world, and that most people encounter as dry, empty husks without knowing what they are the egg cases of rays and small sharks, tough, leathery capsules that house the developing embryo, tethered to the seafloor or wedged into rock crevices by tendrils at the corners, and that protect the developing young through the weeks or months of their development until the young ray is ready to cut its way out and begin its independent life. The egg cases of different species are different shapes, and the shapes are characteristic enough that an experienced beachcomber can identify the species from the case alone. The thornback's case different from the small-eyed ray's case, different from the cuckoo ray's case. Each one a signature of the species that produced it, a reproductive artifact as specific to its maker as a fingerprint. The egg cases are the ray's connection to the land, the only part of the ray's life that touches the shore that leaves a trace on the beach, that gives the people who walk on the beach and look down a clue that the water they are standing beside is full of animals they will never see. The cow ray, the electric ray, the bat ray, the California butterfly ray. The names accumulate, each one attached to an animal so particular to its environment and so complete in its adaptation that a lifetime of study would not exhaust its interest. The bat ray of the Eastern Pacific, with its broad wings and its diamond-shaped disc, and its habit of rooting through the sediment for buried mollusks and crustaceans, using its snout to excavate and its powerful crushing teeth to process. The butterfly ray of the warm coastal waters, nearly circular in outline, the wings extending so far to either side that the body looks less like a fish and more like a geometric form, a shape that belongs to mathematics rather than biology, until it moves and the mathematics becomes alive. Each species a variation on the theme, each one the ocean's answer to a specific local question about how to be a flat animal on the bottom of the sea. The ray's eyes, positioned on top of the head facing upward, in the exact position that is least useful for seeing the bottom on which the ray lives and most useful for seeing what is above, what is coming down from the water column, what predators or opportunities are approaching from above. The ray does not see the sand beneath it, it sees the water above it, the light coming down from the surface, the shapes of the animals moving in the water column overhead. The bottom beneath it is detected by the other senses, the ampullae of Lorenzini reading the electrical fields of buried animals, the olfactory system sampling the chemical signature of the sediment and everything in it, the lateral line detecting the pressure changes of burrowing organisms. The eyes look up, the rest of the sensory system looks down. The ray is a two-directional sensor, monitoring what is above and what is below simultaneously, using different senses for different directions, managing a sensory split between the two worlds it inhabits, the water above and the sand below. The lateral line of the ray, the same system that the sharks have, the fluid-filled canals under the skin that detect pressure changes and vibrations in the water, is present in the ray in a form modified by the flattening of the body. In the ray, the lateral line canals run through the pectoral fins, through the wide, flat wings that extend in every direction from the center of the disc, giving the ray's lateral line a much larger surface area than a cylindrical fish of equivalent mass would have, a larger sensor, a more sensitive detector of the pressure changes that signal the movement of organisms in the water above. The ray's wings are ears. The flat disc is a listening device. Every movement in the water above the resting ray is detected through the skin of the wing, translated into nerve signals, processed by the brain, evaluated for relevance. The ray lying on the sand is not passive. It is listening to the ocean with its entire body. There is a moment in the early morning on a tropical reef when the light is new and the water is clear and the rays are beginning to move, rising from the sand where they rested through the night and gliding out over the reef flat in the first warmth of the day, and the sight of them in that light. The flat bodies catching the slanted sunlight from below, the edges of the wings translucent against the blue, is one of the things that people who dive tropical reefs remember long after they have forgotten most of what they saw. The ray in movement is a different animal from the ray at rest. At rest, it is a patch of sand that breathes. In movement, it is one of the most graceful things in the ocean. The wave motion running along the fins, producing a continuous fluid undulation that seems to belong to the water itself, rather than to a discrete organism, an animal that has become, in motion, an expression of the medium it moves through. Breathe now. Let the slow wave motion of the ray's wings become the rhythm of your breathing, slow and regular and fluid, neither forced nor held, simply moving, the way the wings move, the way the water moves around them, the way the light moves through the water and makes patterns on the sand below. The reef is quiet around us, and the rays are moving in the morning light, and the water is warm and clear and full of the details that only the patient observer sees. The small crabs moving at the edge of the coral, the small fish hovering in the current, the ray's shadow moving across the sand as it passes above. The Manta Ray Cleaning Station, a location on the reef where cleaner wrasses wait for clients, and among the most loyal clients are the manta rays, which arrive at the cleaning stations on a schedule so regular that the researchers who study them can predict their arrival to within an hour or two. Mantas that have been visiting the same cleaning station for years or decades, that know the location, that know the behavior required of a client, that hover in place and open their gill slits and present the surfaces of their body to the cleaners, allowing the small fish to move over them and remove the parasites and dead tissue that accumulate on any large animal's skin. The cleaning station interaction is one of the most intimate relationships in the reef community, a close physical contact between animals of very different sizes and very different species, maintained by the mutual recognition of a shared protocol, the manta presenting itself in the specific posture that signals cleaning mode and the wrasses responding to that posture with cleaning behavior rather than flight behavior, both parties operating within a framework of behavioral understanding that has been established over evolutionary time and that is enacted fresh in each individual interaction. The manta's relationship with the ocean is as old as anything on the reef. The manta lineage has been in the ocean for millions of years, and the individual mantas that visit the cleaning stations at Yap in Micronesia or at the Maldives or at the reefs of the Coral Triangle have been visiting those specific cleaning stations for decades, returning every season, recognized by the researchers who photographed their distinctive spot patterns on the underside of the disk, building up over the years of those researchers' careers a documented history of individual animals, their arrivals and their departures, their associations with other individuals, their apparent preferences and habits, the portrait of a life lived in the open ocean in a pattern that is recognizable and consistent and individual. The world below the sand, the ray's world. Most of the animals that the ray eats are not visible on the sand surface. They are in it, buried, hidden beneath the thin layer of sediment that covers the reef flat and the sandy plains and the mud flats where the rays feed. The polychaete worms, the bivalves, the crustaceans, the small fish that bury themselves in the sand at night, and that are detectable only by the faint electrical field of their metabolic processes, by the slight depression they make in the sand surface, by the chemical trace of their presence in the water just above. The ray reads all of these signals through its ampullae and its lateral line and its olfactory system as it moves over the bottom, and when it detects a buried animal, it excavates, using the disc and the snout to fan the sand away, using powerful suction to pull the exposed animal from its hiding place, using the crushing teeth to process whatever shell or carapace protects it. The ray is mining the seafloor, moving systematically over the sand as if reading a map of the electrical fields beneath it, stopping at each signal to excavate, extract, and consume, then moving on to the next signal, covering the territory the way a farmer covers a field, methodically, completely, leaving in its wake the distinctive pits and craters of excavation that are the visible signature of the ray's feeding. The pits and craters left by foraging rays are themselves an ecological contribution. The excavations expose buried sediment to the overlying water, releasing nutrients that were locked in the anoxic zone below the surface layer, bringing new substrate to the surface and creating microhabitats in the pits where small organisms can live, creating diversity in the seafloor environment that flat, undisturbed sand does not have. The ray is a bioturbator, mixing the sediment as it feeds, turning the seafloor over, creating the heterogeneity that is the foundation of biodiversity in the benthic environment. The ray feeds the reef not just by being food for the things that eat it, but by transforming the substrate as it eats, aerating the sediment, releasing nutrients, creating habitat, doing the work of the seafloor the way an earthworm does the work of the soil, invisibly and continuously, and at a scale that the individual acts of excavation do not suggest. The night on the reef is the ray's time. Many ray species that are quiescent during the day, resting buried in the sand, become active after dark, moving out over the reef flat and into the shallow lagoons and the seagrass beds to feed, navigating in complete darkness with their electrical sense and their olfactory system, reading the bottom by signals that have no visual component, that are entirely chemical and electrical and mechanical. The nocturnal ray moves through a dark world with perfect confidence, oriented by senses that do not require light, feeding efficiently in conditions that would be essentially impenetrable to animals dependent on vision. The darkness that makes the reef quiet and empty to human eyes is, to the ray, simply the usual condition of the work, the time when the buried things are more accessible because the overlying water is darker, and the predators that hunt by sight are less effective. The dawn is coming somewhere. Far above the reef, far above the water surface, the sky is beginning to change, the black of the deep night giving way to the first indistinct lightening in the east that happens before any color appears, before any warmth, just a subtle reduction in the depth of the dark that only the most alert attention would notice. The rays on the reef are beginning to settle. The nocturnal feeders are finding their resting places for the day, pressing themselves into the sand and covering themselves with a few sweeps of the pectoral fins, the sand settling over the edges of the disc, the silhouette dissolving into the substrate, the eyes and spiracles above the sand still watching and breathing. By the time the first light reaches the bottom of the reef, the rays are already invisible. They have become the sand. They will be the sand all day, breathing through their spiracles, monitoring the water above them with their upward-facing eyes and their lateral line and their electrical sense, waiting for the dark to return and the feeding to begin again. 200 million years of this. 200 million mornings of settling into the sand as the light comes, 200 million evenings of rising from the sand as the light fades. The ancient rhythm of the benthic animal, the oldest commute in the history of the ocean. Repeated every day since before the Atlantic existed, before the dinosaurs, before the flowering plants, before almost everything that currently lives on the land above the water and looks at the ocean and wonders what is in it. What is in it is this: the flat animals on the flat bottom, the sand that is alive, the wings that fold into the substrate at dawn and unfold at dusk, the electrical sense reading the buried world, the eyes looking up at the light coming down, the spiracles opening and closing with each breath, the whole ancient patient apparatus of the ray, doing what it has always done, in the sand that has always been there, in the ocean that has always been there, in the dark that comes every night and goes every morning, and in which the rays have always been exactly what they are. Your body is very still now. The breathing has found the rhythm that is almost not a rhythm, so slow that each breath is complete in itself, a separate event rather than part of a cycle, each one arriving in its own time without urgency. The weight of everything the day contained has settled through the surface beneath you and gone somewhere below, the way sediment settles through the water column and comes to rest on the bottom, drifting down through all the layers until it finds the floor and stops. The floor is there. It is always there. The rays are in it. They have always been in it. And the dark above it is full of the ocean, warm or cold, depending on where you put yourself in it, deep or shallow, lit or dark, but always the ocean, always full of the creatures that have made it their home and that are there right now tonight, doing what they have always done. The ray breathes. The spiracle opens and closes. The sand holds everything. The dark holds everything. You are very nearly asleep. The last thoughts are moving through the mind the way particles of sand move through the water column, slowly, without direction, drifting down toward the quiet place where thoughts stop and sleep begins. The reef is silent and the sand is still, and the rays are in it, and they have been in it since before the mountains above you were mountains, and they will be in it long after the mountains are gone, and the ocean has rearranged itself again into whatever it will be next. In the millions of years that are ahead of it and the millions of years that are behind it, which are more than enough for all of this. More than enough for the rays and the sand and the dark water and the sleeping you. Sleep now. The rays are in the sand. The ocean is keeping them. The night is old and wide and still. Sleep. The wedgefish, Rhinchobatidae, another family at the boundary between shark and ray. The wedgefishes are large, heavy-bodied animals that share the ray's broad pectoral fins and flattened head, but retain a more robust, shark-like body and tail, and that live in the coastal waters of the Indo-Pacific and East Africa, in the shallow estuaries, and inshore reefs that are also the most heavily fished and most degraded marine environments in the world. The wedgefish is among the most endangered families of marine fish on Earth. All species are critically endangered. They are wide and slow and coastal, exactly the profile of an animal that is caught in every net and every trap that enters its habitat. Exactly the profile of an animal whose fins are large and valuable enough that there is financial incentive to target them specifically. Exactly the profile of an animal whose reproductive biology, slow to mature and producing small numbers of large, well-developed young, cannot sustain removal at any commercially significant rate. The wedgefish may be the most endangered group of fish in the world, and almost no one outside of the specialist community that studies them knows their name. The way a ray turns, the mechanics of it. A ray changing direction is not a fish turning, not the lateral flex of a body in the water. It is a rolling, warping motion, one wing rising and the other falling, the entire disc tilting in the water like a leaf caught in a current. And then the tilt reverses as the new direction is established, and the ray levels out and continues. The whole maneuver accomplished in a way that uses the surface area of the wings as control surfaces, rather than the tail and body, the way an aircraft uses its ailerons. The ray is more aircraft than fish in its movement dynamics, the wing surface doing the work of steering as well as the work of propulsion, the body held rigid while the wings do everything. A division of function between the stable platform and the active control surfaces that is the same fundamental architecture as a fixed-wing aircraft, and that produces, in the water, the same quality of movement. The glide, the bank, The turn that looks effortless because the efficiency of the wing surface in water is as high as the efficiency of an airfoil in air. The eagle ray in formation. Multiple eagle rays swimming in loose formation above the reef. Their movements not synchronized in the tight coordination of the cownose ray school, but loosely parallel, each individual maintaining its own course and speed while remaining within the visual and sensory range of the others, the formation shifting and reforming as individuals diverge and converge. The formation is social. The eagle ray is not a solitary animal. It aggregates, it gathers, it moves in groups that have a looseness and an informality that is different from the tight schooling of the cownose ray, but that is still a form of sociality, still a choice to be in proximity to others of the same species, still a behavior that implies the individual benefits from the company of its kind in some way that single animals without company do not benefit. The benefits may be predator detection, multiple sets of eyes and lateral lines covering more of the water column and providing earlier warning. The benefits may be foraging efficiency, multiple animals disturbing the substrate and flushing buried prey into the water where all of them can access it. The benefits may be something that we have not yet measured and that operates through mechanisms we have not yet identified. The eagle ray gathers. The ocean is social in ways that the vocabulary of social behavior, developed in terrestrial contexts, does not always adequately describe. The deep water skates. Beyond the reef, beyond the continental shelf, in the cold deep water of the bathyal zone, where the light has long since failed, and the pressure is tens of atmospheres and the temperature is just above freezing, there are skates. The skates are the cold water, deep water representatives of the batoid lineage, flat-bodied rays adapted to the hard seafloor of the deep continental slope and the abyssal plain, adapted to feeding on the sparse prey available at those depths, adapted to reproduction in conditions where the energy budget is so constrained that every egg represents an enormous investment, and the clutch size is accordingly small. The deep water skates are almost entirely unknown to the general public and only partially known to science, because the deep is hard to reach and the skates in it are hard to observe and hard to collect and hard to study, and the papers describing new species of deep water skates are published regularly as deep sea surveys reveal the extent of the diversity that has been living in the cold, dark water below the illuminated world, quietly, for millions of years, without any human awareness of its existence. The round skate, the roughneck skate, the long-nosed skate, the California skate, the Pacific electric ray that the indigenous peoples of the Pacific coast knew and used, and that the early naturalists who encountered it found astonishing. Each one a variation, each one an answer, each one an animal that has found a specific way to be flat in a specific part of the ocean. And that has been doing so for long enough that the specific way it is flat is a reliable guide to the specific conditions of the part of the ocean it inhabits. Read the shape of a skate's disc, and you are reading something about the depth of the water where it lives, the temperature, the type of substrate, the nature of the prey. The body is a record. The flat shape is a document. The animal is its own natural history. The ancient seafloor, think about what the seafloor is. Under the sand, under the few centimeters of active substrate, where the rays and the worms and the small crustaceans live, there is sediment laid down over millions of years. The compressed record of everything that fell through the water column in every season and every year and every century since the ocean occupied this particular basin. The shells of foraminifera, each one smaller than a grain of sand, accumulated in layers that record the temperature of the ocean when they grew, the chemistry of the water, the state of the climate, the bones of fish and the hard parts of crustaceans, the spores and pollen of land plants carried out to sea by rivers, the dust of volcanic eruptions, the meteoric material that drifts down through the atmosphere and falls through the water column in a constant slow rain from space. The sediment is the ocean's memory, the physical archive of the past, and the rays rest on top of it, pressing their bodies into the top millimeter of a record that extends beneath them for hundreds of meters, and that covers the history of the ocean from the first day it occupied this basin. The ray resting on the seafloor is resting on top of deep time. It is the most recent layer of a record that extends through every significant event in Earth's history for the past 65 million years, or the past 100 million years, depending on where in the ocean you are standing and how long that part of the ocean floor has been underwater. Beneath the ray, the record of the asteroid impact that ended the dinosaurs. Beneath the ray, the record of the Paleocene-Eocene thermal maximum, when the ocean warmed by 5 degrees in 50,000 years, and the chemistry of the water changed dramatically and many species went extinct. Beneath the ray, the record of the ice ages and the warm periods, the oscillations of the climate across the timescales that are too long for any living organism to experience, but that are preserved in the sediment as clearly as writing. The ray does not know any of this is beneath it. It knows the top millimeter, the sand that its ampullae can read, the few centimeters of substrate that contain the buried animals it eats. But it is resting on top of the whole record. It is the present moment of the ocean, pressing itself into the past. The breathing is very slow now, and the body has given up most of the tension that the day put into it. The muscles releasing their contractions, the joints softening, the weight distributing through the surface beneath you in the way that a ray distributes its weight through the seafloor, evenly, completely, without any part of it raised or held. The breath comes and goes. The dark is complete or nearly so. The mind is moving in the slow current of the pre-sleep state, where thoughts arrive without origin and depart without consequence, and the line between waking and dreaming is already blurred beyond the ability to locate it precisely. The ocean floor is old, and the rays are old, and the sand is patient, and the water above it is always moving, and the light changes every moment, and the creatures in it respond to every change with the full sensitivity of systems refined over hundreds of millions of years. The ray responds to the change of light. The spiracle opens and closes. The ampullae read the electrical field of a small crab moving through the sand 6 centimeters below the surface. The lateral line detects the pressure wave of a fish passing 3 meters above. The eye watches the water column above the resting body. Nothing is missed. Nothing is wasted. The ray lying in the sand is more alert to its environment than any human technology we currently possess can match. It is a sensor array in flat form, in the shape of an animal, in the posture of rest. The day will come again, and the rays will rise from the sand and move over the reef, and the eagle rays will fly through the open water, and the manta will glide above everything on its 7-meter wings, and the sawfish will sweep its toothed rostrum through the school. And the electric ray will detonate in the dark, and all of it will be happening in the ocean that covers most of this planet, in the water that has been here for 4 billion years, in the sand that has been accumulating for as long as the ocean has been here, and the rays will be in it, flat and ancient and extraordinary, doing what they have done since before the dinosaurs walked on the land above them. But not yet. Right now it is night. Right now the sand is still and the water is dark and the rays are in the substrate, and the breathing is slow and everything is quiet, and you are very nearly gone into the sleep that is waiting just below the last thought, just below the last awareness. In the dark that is the same dark the rays have always known, the dark at the bottom of the ocean, the dark under the sand, the absolute restful permanent dark of the ancient seafloor that has been there since before anything breathed air, since before anything had lungs to breathe with, since before the first creature dragged itself onto the land and discovered that the world above the water existed. The ray never did that. The ray stayed. The ray is still there, in the water, in the sand, in the dark, doing what it has always done, being what it has always been. Sleep now. The rays are in the sand. The dark holds everything. The ocean is still. Sleep, the ribbon-tailed stingray, moving through seagrass beds, the tail trailing behind it like a silk thread in the current, the motion of that tail as beautiful as any movement the ocean produces. The seagrass beds are the nursery of the reef, the place where the smallest and the most recently born shelter in the tangle of blades, and the stingray moves through them at night, the ampullae reading the electrical fields of the small crabs and shrimp that hide in the grass, the snout excavating the animals from their shelter, the teeth crushing whatever the snout extracts. The seagrass bed at night is active in the dark way of all nocturnal environments, full of small movements and small sounds and small encounters, the stingray moving through it all as the largest and most patient actor, taking what it finds and leaving the rest, the grass closing behind it as it passes and the small movements continuing, the life of the grass bed resuming in the wake of the ray's passage as if the ray had never been there. The diversity of the skates. There are more than 250 species of skates in the family Ragidae, making them one of the most diverse families of chondrichthyans. More species of skates than of any other ray group. More species of skates than of most shark families. They range from the tropics to the Arctic and Antarctic, from the shallow intertidal zone to depths of more than 5,000 meters. From small species that fit in a human hand to the flapper skate of the North Atlantic, which can reach 2.5 meters across the disk. The largest skate in the world, once common in the waters around Britain and Scandinavia, and now listed as critically endangered, reduced from historical abundances by bottom trawling that removes skates as bycatch at rates their biology cannot sustain. The flapper skate may live for more than 100 years. A flapper skate alive today may have hatched before the Second World War. It is being caught in trawl nets set for other species, and it is dying before it has produced the offspring that would replace it, and its population is declining, and the century of its life is being cut short by the few hours it takes a trawl to sweep the bottom where it rests. The thorntail stingray, the blue-spotted stingray, the pelagic stingray, the deep-water stingray, the cowtail stingray, each one occupying a specific position in the ecology of a specific part of the ocean, each one performing the function of the benthic predator, the excavator of the seafloor, the recycler of the nutrients locked in the sediment, the prey of the larger animals that depend on the rays as part of their diet. Remove the rays from the reef, and the shellfish populations explode. Remove the rays from the seagrass beds, and the organisms that live in the sediment under the grass accumulate without the mixing and the excavation that the ray provides. Remove the rays from the sandy plains of the continental shelf, and the seafloor ecology shifts in ways that cascade through every level of the benthic community. The ray is structural. The flat animals in the sand are holding the bottom of the ocean together in a way that is invisible until they are gone. The underside of the ray. This is something that most people who encounter rays in the wild never see, because the ray presents its patterned upper surface to the water above and keeps its underside against the substrate. But the underside is pale, nearly white in many species, and it is where the mouth is, and the gill slits, and in the male, the claspers that are the intromittent organs of fertilization, the paired structures derived from the pelvic fins that are used to transfer sperm to the female during mating, structures that are present in all male chondrichthyans, and that are one of the anatomical features that link the rays to the sharks as members of the same ancient group. The underside of the ray tells you that it is a vertebrate, that it has a mouth and gills and a reproductive system, that it is a complete and complex organism and not merely a flattened shape in the sand. The underside reveals the animal. The topside conceals it. The ray lives in the concealment, pressed into the substrate, the underside against the sand, the upper surface becoming the sand, and only the eyes looking up and the spiracles breathing give any indication that the sand is, in places, alive. The spiracle as a window. When you find a ray resting on the sandy bottom, buried to the disc line with only the eyes and spiracles above the sand, and you position yourself at rest in the water above it and wait and watch, the spiracle becomes a clock. Opening, closing, the rhythm of the ray's breathing, slow and regular, a biological clock ticking in the sand. The only sign that the thing you are looking at is an animal, and not a pattern in the sediment. And if you watch long enough, the eye moves. Just slightly, a small adjustment of the pupil, a fractional change in the direction of gaze, and you realize the ray is watching you, has been watching you since before you found it, has been monitoring your approach through the water with its upward-facing eye and its lateral line and its electrical sense, has known you were there before you knew where it was. The ray was watching you while you were looking for it. The sand was watching you. The bottom of the ocean was watching you with two patient eyes and measuring you with the full range of a sensory system that was detecting every movement you made, every pressure wave, every electrical field of your living tissue, all of it being processed and evaluated. And the ray's conclusion was the ray's behavior, which was to remain still, to continue being the sand, to let you find it in your own time or not find it at all, because it had no need to move and no reason to reveal itself, and the strategy of perfect stillness had been working for 200 million years before you arrived at this particular patch of sand on this particular morning. The patience of the ray is not a metaphor. It is a quantifiable behavioral characteristic, a tendency to remain still in the presence of potential threat for longer than most other animals would, a tendency that is adaptive because the camouflage that makes stillness safe for the ray is so effective that the threat often fails to detect the ray and moves on without the ray ever needing to expend the energy of flight. The ray has learned, over 200 million years of sitting in sand, that the best response to danger is to be the sand, not to move toward the danger, not to move away from the danger, to become inert, to cease to be an animal and become a feature of the substrate. The patience is the strategy. The stillness is the survival. The sand is the armor. The ocean is full of strategies, full of solutions to the problem of being alive in a world that is also full of things that eat you. The manta's size, the blue-spotted ribbontail's toxicity, the electric ray's discharge, the stingray's spine, the skate's egg case, designed to protect the developing embryo through weeks of exposure, all of them solutions, all of them working in their respective contexts, all of them the result of the same process, the accumulation of small advantages over millions of generations until the advantage is so complete and so refined that it is no longer an adaptation but simply what the animal is, inseparable from the animal's existence, as much a part of it as its skin. Your breathing is very slow now. The thoughts that were moving through the mind a little while ago have mostly settled, the way the sand settles after a ray's passage, finding their level, coming to rest. There is not much left between you and the sleep that is waiting just below this moment. The ocean is out there, in the dark, and the rays are in the sand at the bottom of it. And they have been there since before the mountains were mountains, and they will be there after whatever the next rearrangement of the world produces. The sand is patient. The rays are patient. The ocean is patient. 200 million years of patience, pressed into the substrate of the sea, breathing through spiracles, watching the water above with upward-facing eyes. Let the patience of the sand come into your body now. The patience of an animal that has survived everything by staying still. The patience of the seafloor that has been there since before any of this. The patience of the dark that comes every night and waits without effort and holds everything in it. The ocean and the sand and the rays and the breathing and the life that goes on at the bottom of the water, in the dark and the cold and the silence. All of it held by the dark. All of it sustained by the ocean. All of it as old as anything alive on this planet. Sleep. The ray is in the sand. The spiracle opens and closes. The eye watches the dark water. And you are gone. Into the sleep that is as deep as the ocean floor and as old as the sand and as still as the animal that has made itself indistinguishable from the bottom of the sea. Sleep. The ocean keeps everything. The dark holds everything. The rays are in the sand. Sleep. The sandbar and the ray. The sandy estuaries where the bull sharks hunt and the rays feed and the tides move in and out twice a day, reshaping the bottom with every cycle, covering yesterday's ray pits with new sand and exposing new substrate for today's foraging. The estuary is one of the most dynamic environments in the ocean, the place where the river meets the sea, where the salinity changes with every tide and every rainstorm and every season, where the temperature fluctuates with the sun and the air and the depth of the water over the sand, where the prey communities shift in response to all of these changes, and the animals that eat them must shift accordingly. The ray of the estuary is a generalist, adapted to the variability of the environment, capable of feeding on whatever the substrate provides in whatever conditions the tide creates. The cowtail stingray in the mangrove estuary, the yellow stingray in the Caribbean shallows, the bat ray in the California lagoon, each one moving with the tides, following the productivity that moves with the water, resting when the water retreats and feeding when it returns. The estuary is never the same twice, and the ray that lives in it has the behavioral flexibility to match the estuary's variability, the sensory resolution to read the shifting bottom, the patience to wait when waiting is what the moment requires, and the readiness to move when movement is what the moment requires. The manta ray and the moon. The manta's feeding behavior is influenced by the lunar cycle in ways that are consistent across populations studied in different parts of the world. In the days around the full moon, when the tides are strongest and the upwelling of deep water that brings nutrients to the surface is most pronounced, the manta feeding aggregations tend to be at their largest, the animals gathering in the channels and above the seamounts, where the upwelling concentrates the plankton. The manta has been tracking the lunar cycle for as long as mantas have existed, using the moon as a calendar for the productivity of the ocean, timing its aggregations to the nights when the ocean provides most generously. The moon that the manta has been reading for millions of years is the same moon that is above the ocean right now, in whatever phase it is in tonight, pulling the tides and driving the upwelling and organizing the productivity of the ocean in the slow rhythm that the manta has been following since before the first human looked up at the night sky and gave the moon a name. The ray's egg case and the patience of development. Inside the egg case, in the dark of the substrate where the case is wedged, the embryo develops over weeks and months, sustained by the yolk that was provided at fertilization, growing through the stages of development that will produce a complete and functional ray at hatching. The embryo has no experience of the ocean. It has no experience of light or current or the pressure of depth. It has only the yolk and the case and the slow passage of time. And yet when it hatches, when it cuts its way out of the case and enters the water for the first time, it can swim. It can breathe through its spiracles. Its ampullae are functional. Its lateral line is operational. Its olfactory system is reading the water. Its eyes are seeing the light. Everything is ready. Everything was assembled in the dark, in the case, on the yolk, without any experience to guide it, purely from the instructions encoded in the genome. The accumulated genetic knowledge of every ray that produced a successful offspring in the entire history of the lineage. The hatchling is not learning to be a ray. It was a ray before it hatched. It emerges complete. The torpedo rays discharge in the dark. The electric pulse traveling through the water in all directions from the point of origin, diminishing with the square of the distance, reaching the fish in the vicinity before the fish has any sensory warning that it is coming. The fish's nervous system disrupted by the pulse. The fish unable to coordinate its muscles for the fraction of a second that is all the electric ray needs. The electric ray's circular mouth opening and the fish being drawn in. The suction of the engulfing mouth pulling the stunned fish from the water around it into the darkness of the gut. And then stillness again. The electric ray settling back into the sand, recharging, invisible, waiting. The fish that was there is not there. The water above the electric ray is undisturbed. There is no sign of what happened. The sand looks as it always looks, flat and pale and empty. And the electric ray in it is as invisible as it was before the encounter, already recharging, already monitoring the water above it for the next signal. The ray and the remora. The smaller rays, the ones large enough to be worth attaching to but not so large that the remora cannot maintain contact during the ray's movements, sometimes carry remoras on their upper surface, the remora's suction disc holding it in place through the ray's undulating swim. The remora feeding on the scraps of the ray's meals and on the parasites that accumulate on the ray's skin, providing the same cleaning service that remoras provide to sharks and large fish across the ocean. The remora on the ray is a smaller version of the same relationship, scaled to the size of the host, the same ancient commensalism that connects the cleaner to the cleaned across the entire range of marine animal sizes. And that has been working, in one form or another, since before either the ray or the remora had evolved into the specific forms they have today. The ocean's relationships are old. The ocean's partnerships are ancient. The remora holding to the ray's back in the current is performing a service that its lineage has been performing for millions of years, in the same ocean, over the same sand, in the same dark, warm water of the tropics that has always sustained both of them. The night is very deep now. The breathing is very slow. The mind has gone to the quiet place where the thoughts are few and far between, and the ones that arrive are small and pass quickly, like small fish passing over the sand, there and gone without leaving much trace. The ocean is out there in the dark, and the rays are in the sand at the bottom of it, and the ancient seafloor is beneath the rays, and the ancient water is above the rays, and the ancient dark is in everything, and the ancient patience of the animal that has made itself indistinguishable from the substrate is in everything too. The stillness that is a strategy, the quiet that is a survival, the deep calm of an animal that has not needed to change in 200 million years, because what it is has always been exactly right for where it is. That is enough. That is everything. 200 million years of exactly right, pressed into the sand, breathing through spiracles, watching the water above with patient eyes. The ray is there. It has always been there. And you are here, and the night is dark, and the sand is patient, and the ocean is old, and the breathing is slow, and there is nothing left between you and the sleep that is already here, already present, already surrounding you the way the water surrounds the ray. Everywhere and without weight. The spiracle opens, the spiracle closes. The eye watches the dark. The sand holds everything. You are asleep. The Dasyatid stingrays of the Mediterranean. Once common in the shallow sandy bays and estuaries of the European coast, the common stingray and the smooth stingray moving through the warm summer shallows where the rivers reach the sea, feeding in the mixed substrate of sand and mud and shell debris that the Mediterranean's shallow northern margins provide, their populations reduced now by decades of coastal development and habitat loss and the degradation of the water quality that inshore development produces, still present in some protected areas, still occasionally encountered by divers and by fishermen, but a shadow of what they were when the Mediterranean was less crowded and the inshore waters were less disturbed. The Mediterranean ray is not famous. It does not have the charisma of the manta or the mystery of the deep water skate or the danger of the torpedo ray. It is a medium-sized animal doing what medium-sized animals do in coastal waters, eating shellfish and small fish and crustaceans, resting in the sand at night and moving by day, contributing its share of the bioturbation and the nutrient cycling that keeps the Mediterranean's bottom ecology functioning. It is unremarkable in the way that all the essential things are unremarkable, the things that do their work without spectacle, that hold the system together without being noticed, that are missed most profoundly when they are gone. The way the light reaches the bottom in shallow water. The sunlight that enters the ocean at the surface is scattered and absorbed as it descends, the red wavelengths gone within the first few meters, the orange and yellow following as the depth increases, until, in the deepest part of the sunlit zone, only the blue remains. A deep, cold blue that has no warmth in it, only light. But in the shallows, in the few meters of water over the sandy bottom of the tropical reef or the temperate bay, the full spectrum is present, the light broken into moving patterns by the surface above, the shadows and the bright spots shifting constantly over the sand below, making the bottom a living canvas of light and movement that changes from second to second as the surface moves and the angle of the sun moves, and the water clarity changes with the currents. The ray lying on this bottom is lying in the light show that the shallow ocean makes of sunlight, the patterns moving over its patterned back in a layering of camouflage, the ray's own colors and textures adding another layer to the already complex visual landscape of the bottom, so that finding it in this light is even harder than finding it in flat light. The moving shadows and bright spots making the outline of the disk impossible to read against the moving pattern of the substrate. The ray is part of the light on the bottom. The ray and the light are the same thing, for the practical purposes of detection, the one indistinguishable from the other. And the predator that is looking for the outline of a ray against the sand is looking for something that is not there to be found, because the outline has been dissolved into the pattern of the light, absorbed into the visual complexity of the shallow ocean bottom, made invisible not by darkness, but by the excess of pattern. The camouflage working not by matching a fixed background, but by matching a dynamic one, the ray's colors and textures part of the same constantly shifting visual field that the light is creating on the sand. Your body is fully settled now. The last tensions have dissolved. The breath is coming and going in the long, slow rhythm that belongs to the hours before dawn, when the body is as rested as it will be, and the sleep is deepest, and the dreams, if there are dreams, are the quiet ones, the ones that move slowly through imagery without urgency. The ocean is out there. The rays are in the sand. The light will come again to the shallow water and move across the bottom in its patterns, and the rays will be in it, invisible, patient, ancient, doing the work of the benthic world as they have always done it. The last thing before sleep. The sandy bottom of the ocean, pale and still and faintly lit by whatever light reaches it, the patterns of the surface moving across it in slow waves of brightness and shadow, and somewhere in it, in the boundary between the visible and the invisible, between the sand and the animal, between the floor of the ocean and the life that has made itself part of that floor, the ray. Breathing, watching, patient beyond any patience that the waking mind can fully hold. Be patient now. Be still. Be the sand for this last moment before the sleep takes you. Be the thing that has made itself part of the floor and found, in that making, 200 million years of perfect rest. The ocean holds you. The sand is patient. The dark is complete. The ray breathes. Sleep, the ray and the season. The rays are not immune to the turning of the year, the shift from warm season to cold, the change in the productivity of the water, the alteration of the prey communities with the temperature. In temperate waters, the rays that were plentiful in summer shallows move to deeper water in winter, following the prey to the zones where the water temperature remains more stable, spending the cold months in the darkness and pressure of deeper water, and returning to the shallows in spring as the water warms and the productivity of the benthic communities recovers from the winter's relative scarcity. This seasonal movement has been documented in stingrays along the Atlantic coast of the United States, in skates in the North Sea, in thornback rays in the English Channel, each population making its quiet annual migration between the shallow warm season feeding grounds and the deeper cold season refuges, the movement invisible from shore, happening in the water without spectacle, tracked now by the acoustic tags that researchers attach to individual animals and that reveal the migration as a clear and consistent pattern. The same animals making the same movements in the same directions, at the same times year after year, the seasonal calendar of the ray as reliable and as old as the seasons themselves. The denticles of the ray. The skin of the rays, like the skin of all chondrichthyans, is covered with dermal denticles, the tiny tooth-like structures that give the skin its rough texture and that function as drag reduction along the body surface. The same engineering that the shark's denticles provide, here distributed across the flat disc of the ray's body in patterns that reflect the specific hydrodynamic requirements of ragiform locomotion. On the upper surface, the denticles are arranged to reduce drag as the water flows over the wing surface during the undulating swim. On the edges of the wings, they may be modified to manage the vortices that form at the trailing edge. In some species, the denticles on the tail are enlarged into spines or thorns that contribute to defense. The denticles are not merely texture, they are functional elements of an integrated aerodynamic system, refined over 200 million years of swimming in water, and the study of ray skin for potential applications in underwater vehicle design and drag reduction has produced insights that would not have been available from the study of any other source, because the ray has been solving those particular fluid dynamics problems since before humans had any tools to think about fluid dynamics with. The ray that does not move for a day. Imagine it, an animal of perhaps half a meter across, lying on the same patch of sand for 24 consecutive hours, not because it is injured or ill, but because the sand is right and the conditions are right, and there is no compelling reason to move. The metabolic rate of the ray at rest is low enough that it does not need to feed every day. Its oxygen requirements are met by the spherical ventilation. Its sensory systems are monitoring the environment continuously at very low energy cost. It can simply be there in the sand, doing nothing that a human observer would recognize as activity, and be perfectly healthy, perfectly functional, perfectly alive. The ability to do nothing, to be completely still for extended periods without metabolic consequence, is an adaptation to the patchy and unpredictable availability of prey in the benthic environment, where the ability to wait out long periods between meals without suffering is as important as the ability to capture prey efficiently when it is available. The ray has patience in the literal metabolic sense, the ability to sustain life on very little for as long as necessary, waiting in the sand for the moment when something worth the energy of pursuit enters its sensory range. The last light. At the end of the day, the light that has been moving across the bottom all afternoon, in its long, slow shift from the angle of noon to the angle of late afternoon, to the angle of the final few degrees before the sun touches the horizon, the color shifting from white to gold to the deep orange of the day's end, the shadows of the coral heads and the rocks lengthening across the sand, until they cover more of the bottom than the light does, and the bottom is more shadow than sun. The rays that have been buried all day are beginning to sense the change, the light above them dimming, the temperature of the water at the surface beginning its nightly cooling, the cues that signal the transition from the day's stillness to the night's activity. The spiracle keeps breathing. The eye watches the changing light above, and then at some point in the transition that is specific to each individual and each day, the ray moves. The wings begin to fan. The sand around the disk rim lifts and drifts in small clouds. The ray rises from the substrate that it has been for the past several hours and becomes an animal again, distinct, mobile, entering the water column above the bottom. The pectoral fins beginning the slow undulation that will carry it over the reef flat and into the seagrass, and across the sandy plains to wherever tonight's feeding will take it. The night opens around the ray as it moves. The reef is entering its nocturnal phase, the day animals retreating to their shelter, and the night animals emerging from theirs, and the ray is one of the night animals, moving through the darkness with the full repertoire of its non-visual senses extended, reading the bottom, reading the water above, reading the signals that mean food, and the signals that mean danger, and the signals that mean nothing in particular except that the ocean is alive and active and full of the information that the ray's senses were built to process. The night, the sand, the ray, the ancient equation of the benthic world, the flat animal and the flat bottom and the dark water above them, a relationship so old and so stable and so perfectly resolved that it requires no further explanation, no further justification, no further development. It is what it is. It has been what it is for 200 million years, and it will be what it is for 200 million more. If the ocean is still there to hold it, and the sand is still there to receive it, and the dark water is still there to cover both of them, sleep now. You have been in the water long enough tonight. You have been on the bottom long enough. You have been with the rays in the sand, in the ancient dark, in the patient quiet of the oldest animals on the seafloor, and it is time to let the sleep take what the ocean has prepared. The weight of the body pressing down into the surface beneath you, the slow breath that is almost not breathing, it is so gentle and so regular. The dark that is complete and warm and safe. The mind that is already halfway into the dreaming, already moving in the slow current of the sleep that has been building all hour, and that is now finally here. The sand holds you. The dark holds you. The ocean holds everything. The ray breathes in the sand. The spiracle opens, the spiracle closes, and you are gone. Sleep.